Just go for it.
Well, that's my question. What's the framework for the political dialectic?
Another stroll in the shadows, one more familiar street. It seems that history is bound to repeat. That's how my destiny's drawn. Just when the story is shifting, turns out it's too good to last. Maybe I just can't escape from the past as I go chasing the dawn. Why don't you just release me and go your separate way? My heart has nothing left to give away. Another drink for my troubles, another cold cigarette. I'm not the type, but I'll take a bet that flame will keep burning on as I go chasing the dawn, as I go chasing the dawn, as I go chasing the dawn.
Hello, everybody. We are live on YouTube as well. Just want to say to everybody, this is a Twitter space, but you can feel free to super chat or chat here on YouTube as well. We'll be broadcasting this whole topic of the political dialectic with Noam Roth, but it is also live on Twitter. And let's see how this goes. We're hoping to be doing this much more often from now on. Noam, how's it going, man?
Pretty good. Excited to get into this.
Excellent. So why don't you give everyone like a small background?
Well, the dialectic is a process that has been used throughout the recent or modern history to advance humanity in a specific way to a specific purpose, which sounds very tame, innocent, or reasonable if you read the surface level. But if you go deeper into this and you see where they take their ideas, why they take their ideas, and what they want you to do with their ideas, it becomes way darker very fast.
Okay. So you said we wouldn't be able to get into all of them today. So I assume we're going to get started with Marx and Engels and Gentile. Or do you want to just do history?
We're going to end up at them.
Okay.
But, okay. Do you want to start now, or do you want to wait for more people to filter in?
Let's just go. We got plenty of time.
Okay. So, I want to start with this. I'm going to start with a few things that we should keep in mind. And it's stuff that we should keep in the background of everything we're talking about, because it's really an anchor point. In order for a cult to capture you, they need to make you reject reason, and they need to make you reject reality. Now let's get into it. So, one of the big questions about fascism, socialism, communism, Marxism is, why is it so hard to define it? Why is it purposely almost, it seems, almost undefinable. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. If you think of fascism, then people immediately will have images. They'll have what they think fascism is. But if you ask the father, the inventor of fascism, he says that fascism has to have three components: nationalism, syndicalism, and what he calls actualism. Now, I'm not going to even attempt to read Gentile's book on what he means by actualism, because it's going to take the whole space. But instead, let me try to read the Wikipedia. And listen, in MetaLife, if you have a question, stop me. Like, just
So
ask the
here's
question.
because I don't know what the term cynicalism you said means.
Syndicalism, yeah. Once I'll look up like an actual definition instead of getting bogged down into it. The dry definition would be, again, not very clear, but syndicalism is a labor movement within society that, through industrial unionism, seeks to unionize workers according to industry and advance their demands through strikes and other forms of direct action. But this is more understandable. But let's go to the third part. Again, according to the father of fascism, you can't have fascism without it. Now, actualism or actual idealism, as defined, is, and don't stop me if you don't understand, because you're not going to understand, and that's my point. From Wikipedia directly, which basically summarizes his book on it. Actual idealism was a form of idealism developed by Giovanni Gentile that grew into grounded idealism, contrasting the transcendental idealism of Immanuel Kant and the absolute idealism of G.W.F. Hegel to Gentile, who considered himself the philosopher of fascism, while simultaneously describing himself as liberal and socialist. And socialist. Actualism was presented the sole remedy to philosophically preserving free agency by making the act of thinking self-creative and, therefore, without any contingency and not in the potency of any other fact. Now, Halsey, what did you understand from that?
That it uses direct action to form a collective in order to fulfill a defined goal.
Okay, good. Now let's go to the central tenets. What is actual idealism? Let's see. Actual idealism holds that it is the act of thinking as perception, not creative through as imagination, which defines reality. Therefore, one idea or another can only be formulation of particulars within the bounds of known totality, in which one idea is not on any side of these particulars. Totality constituting the whole cohesive reality is negated in such idea by itself. Integration of totality against idea in appealing to oneself is the sole fruitful means of idea, which poses no favoritism to the developed ideas, giving unknowing precedence to the world it has created itself into. Anything less is precipitation and therefore innately unreal. This totality is the act of thinking, no thoughts so regarded by thinking. Now, if you made anything out of this, I think you'll be the only one on earth, because this makes absolutely no sense and is a whole lot of gibberish.
It's supposed to. It's not supposed to make sense.
Exactly. It makes no sense, and it almost seems on purpose like it makes no sense. So I want to dive today into why none of it makes sense, right? And why, if you would go to any socialist or communist group, subreddit, Twitter chat, it doesn't matter. none of them will agree what socialism, communism, or fascism means. None of them will. And it's designed to be that way. Okay. First of all, I want to paint a picture of what we're going to go through for the next, hopefully, 30 minutes and not more, which is the history of thought that shaped Hegel's thought. There would be no communism without Hegel. There would be no Marxism without Hegel. There would be no fascism without Hegel, and there would be no National Socialism without Hegel. The entire history of thought since pretty much Indo-European people and the rest can be bottlenecked into Hegel, and from Hegel is an explosion of thought. So I want to start with the beginning of this. And there are stuff before, but they're not as concrete, and again, they're badly translated. They're not the best, so I'm not going to rely on them. I'm not going to even bring them into discussion. But let's start with Thales of Miletus, which is the father of philosophy, according to Western philosophy. He believed that he believed in a concept called the world stuff, right? That the whole world is made out of stuff. By the way, for this Thales guy, the father of philosophy, we only have 4 sentences ever recorded of him, by the way. So one of these is his idea of world stuff, that everything is made out of stuff. And what are those stuff, according to him? Water. He was also heavily influenced by the Middle East. We know this because one of the other sentences we know is that he believed that the world was floating on water. Again, none of this is supposed to make sense, but the whole world is water, but he floats on water. Stressed also, if someone has a question, because every sentence is going to be a whole different shift, pause me immediately, because if not, I'm going to lose you and you're going to lose me.
Fair enough about Hegel. Would you state your assertion that these different disparate political philosophies are based on the Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution?
It's going to be way more than that. And in theory, definitely yes. But we're going to get into a broader sense of what that means and why when I'll get back to Hegel. I want to get to, no problem. I want to get from evolution of thought to Hegel. So again, we started with Thales, which is the father of philosophy, and his world stuff, right? Here is pretty much the first time we can see someone thinking about the world, and not in a sense of a religious way, but in a sense of trying to, philosophy way. Roughly around the same time, slightly after, but definitely inspired, is Pythagoras, which many people call the proto-communist because he lived in a commune and they were a bunch of weird hippies. Their religion, the religion of Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans, was Orphism, which is a religion cult from the Middle East that we don't know too much about, but is basically a prototype of Greek mythology. The story of Greek mythology is basically the story of Orphism, changed slightly in the end. Why is it called Orphism? Is because the biggest point in the whole story in how humans were created is, and Halsey correct me because I didn't research that part about Greek mythology, is that Zeus takes the phallus of Dionysus and throws it into the ocean, right?
Pause for a second. Orphism. Yeah. Just because I'm trying to keep track here, what I'm seeing is Orphism revolves around Orpheus, a legendary figure founded in mysteries to compose sacred text. Am I following along right?
Yeah, that's the religion. Yeah, again, it's an ancient Middle Eastern religion.
Okay, carry on. Sorry, I didn't want to be lost because I've never heard of this.
All good. So again, it's pretty much. I don't want to go down the route I was going to because it's going to drag on for no reason. But it's basically all you need to know. It's a prototype of Greek mythology. Same story, older, slightly different in the ending. They believe that by living a pure life, a man's soul can escape this earth and go back home. And again, in Western philosophy, this is the first time that we're seeing a mention or a thought of different worlds, of different quote unquote universes. And I'm specifically saying Western because Judaism is older, but so specifically Western. Now, so if you're living pure life, you can escape this world and go back quote unquote home. And as Leonard Peikoff says, and founders of Western philosophy, this is the primary source of soul-body opposition in Western civilization. Basically, this is the first time we see a few things. One, different realms, and a soul-body opposition, that there is a soul, and your body is different. This is the first time in Western civilization that we come across this kind of idea. Now, one second, let me just find, because I'm trying to follow a graph I created. It'll take me 1 second. Let's see. Okay. So from mostly Thales, but roughly a bit after Pythagoras, comes a character called Heraclitus. He is very important to everything we're going to talk about next. So keep his ideas in mind. Heraclitus builds a little bit on the idea of Thales, the father of philosophy, the world stuff and everything is water idea. And he says, if everything is water, so everything is change, because water is change. Water keeps changing. His most famous sentence is, you can't stand in the same river twice, or something of that version. So he asserts from Thales's philosophy that one, everything is change. Nothing is permanent except change. And two, because that is a contradiction, contradictions are good. And contradictions are real, quote unquote. And he also coined the term, again, in Latin, but in Greek, sorry, but then translated to English, of becoming. That because the world is contradiction, the world is change, if you embrace those contradictions, they will advance you. From Heraclitus, we get sophism in the form of Protagoras, and then slowly but surely we get to Plato, which is Platonism. And from there, I'm just trying to figure out how deep I want to dive into those things.
Quick pause, no. Quick pause.
Yeah.
Is it possible for you to post this graphic you're following in the Nestor comments so the audience may follow along as well?
Yeah, I'll post it actually after, because it's developed, it's like from a few things, only on my laptop, not my phone. So I'm going to try after the space to, oh, and another thing, if anyone wants the sources I'm using, don't ask me in the middle, because I have another tab open with sources, and I don't want to keep going back and forth. Just write to yourself what I'm saying and if you want the source for it, and then after the space, or message me or ask me and I'll provide you the source. I have 17 different tabs open. It will take me too much time going back and forth and finding where I am. Okay. So we stopped at Plato, right? And actually, again, as I said in the beginning, this is going to be very unorganized. This is going to be very, very hard to follow, but by design. Again, the challenge of figuring this out is by design.
You're never supposed to be able to define the true goals of a political philosophy. That's why. It's that you use rhetoric in order to promote a concept, but the deeper concept of it, which everyone assumes is there, but no one knows for a fact is there, is what's going to motivate even a skeptical believer, is the idea that there's deeper meaning to it.
Yep. So I'm going to branch off here into two places. I'm going to spend very short amount of time on them because they can be a whole lecture, semester, degree of their own. So specifically, I'm just going to briefly go over it because for what we're talking about, it doesn't matter. But again, every name I'm going to mention is a world of its own. But from Heraclitus and Pythagoras actually branched into two different trains of thoughts. One of them was Lysippus, which became Democritus. Lysippus was a teacher, Democritus was a student, and Democritus took record of everything Lysippus was saying. And from that guy, that philosopher named Democritus, we got something that is not democracy, but is atomism, right? Atomism, which basically says the whole world, and again, it's taking over the Thales. There must be something here. It's basically a bunch of people trying to figure out the world, right? And we get atomists, which basically say, which was true, and that's why we call it that until today, the whole world is made out of something. It has to be made out of something. That thing is not water. They figured that much out by then. So we'll call it atoms. We don't know what it is. We'll call it atoms. That's actually where we get the word for atoms from, is from there. From that guy, we get two people that will be one branch. We get Aristotle, the father of logic, and we get Epicurus. Epicurus is actually, I want Halsey to join me in a second because that I didn't have time to research. But Epicurus is basically the guy that took all of that branch of the ideology and turned it dark and turned it very evil in a sense. He turned everything into a materialist thing. But what I wanted Halsey for is that I remember somewhere in Judaism Epicurus is mentioned, and I didn't have time to read it or to research it. But so I'm just curious
heresy. Epicurus is just heresy.
So that's very interesting because, as I said, Epicurus took all of those thoughts and turned them pretty dark, to be honest. But again, I don't have time to dwell on it. From the other branch, right, we get Plato. And from Plato, we get Plotinus, which is Neoplatonism. And from there, we get St. Augustine. And St. Augustine, and with Christianity, the Roman Empire, Hermeticism, all of that, we get to Kant. We get to Immanuel Kant. I'm doing a big leap forward, but we have to for this purpose. Why did Kant go back to there? Because of the time, again, we got Epicurus and we got Aristotle, the father of logic. From there was a different series. That series produced a lot of scientists. It produced a lot of thinkers that basically tried to discontinue the idea of God and promote science, right? That was towards the Renaissance. That was from I would say, the middle of the medieval times until the end of the Renaissance. People like Rene, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, George Berkeley, Edmund Burke,
This will help
David
explain
Hume.
also the whole concept of a dialectic and the whole concept of an ism, of a political philosophy. A political philosophy is generally made for the masses, right? Whether it's to keep the masses in control, whether to give them participation, and it's sort of like the Matrix, right? If it satisfied everyone, it would be rejected by everyone, because conflict is what is inherent in human nature. So even if you design a system that 90% of the people love, they're always going to lead to, like I said in the Matrix, like a neo, a systemic anomaly, right? So when you have a blossoming of church conformity in Europe, you get a counter movement of science and technology and astronomy and medicine, because those people that are brilliant but also divergent from the norm are going to excel in the opposite, the yin and the yang, right? So what you'll normally find in any of these political philosophies is there also was a very defined counter movement at the time that may have even been fought by the general movement, but in the end they what's it called, they thrive in unison with each other. They're almost what's it called, they're they're in symbiotic harmony with each other.
Yeah. And to end that time, right, we get to a person, very important person in philosophy called Immanuel Kant. And Kant was religious, and he did not like that the philosophy, that the branch of thinking is slowly walking away from God. And he basically, quote unquote, rediscovers Aristotle and brings it in more of a religious way. He's trying to introduce God back to the thinking, right? And here from Kant, we get to the epicenter of the bottleneck from all of this, from the branches, from all of these thoughts that, again, I wrote down everything, but I'm going to skip so much. Maybe in a different space, we can go back and read through how every single person shaped that thought. But I'm realizing just by naming the names, it took me 30 minutes. So I don't know if I want to do that right now. But yeah, Stress, you had a question?
Well, I might be able to answer it myself, but you had noticed, you had brought up that Immanuel Kant was kind of the progenitor of, well, the God is lost in our society. I don't know. I kind of argue Nietzsche on that one.
Well, listen, Nietzsche at the end of the day was way after. And so he in some ways was, but Nietzsche came from Feuerbach, from Ludwig Feuerbach than Kant. But again, Feuerbach is after the bottleneck. And I'll explain now the bottleneck. The whole thing basically bottlenecked into Immanuel Kant. And I would say truly the core of the bottleneck comes with the next person, which I'm going to be focusing on the most, because after him came the explosion, right? After the bottleneck comes an explosion, and that person is Hegel. I'm not going to go into the history of Hegel. That's a whole different thing. But one thing you need to know about Hegel is that he is weird. Very weird. He is probably the weirdest philosopher to ever exist in more of our modern times, not ancient Greek times. And his thoughts were even weirder than him. Small anecdote about Hegel: he thought he was a wizard. Did he know magic? No, but that's not the point. Halsey, do you have any funny anecdote about Hegel, about the person, not the beliefs? I don't know. I didn't research any. I don't know. I'm dry on that. Okay, no problem. Okay. So this is where I'm going to lose a lot of you. And this is where stuff are going to get weird very fast. But again, by design. If it's by design of Hegel, I don't know. If it's by design that people who took Hegel's weird works and then turned them into even weirder and cultish beliefs, I don't know. But in this sense, you can think of Hegel as the first cult leader of woke, the first cult leader of any ideological cult that came after him. And let's get into his ideology a little bit. Hegel's whole philosophical quest was to find a meaning for life, a meaning for his own life. And his search for the meaning of life led him from Immanuel Kant to God. And this is where the weirdness starts. I'm not gonna read passages out of Hegel because they're gonna make zero sense. Halsey, have you ever read Hegel?
I've read enough of it that I have a general understanding of it. Like he was required reading when I was
Yeah,
in school.
right. So if you read Hegel, you know that it's better to try to nail down his ideology than read straight from the source because he is weird and unintelligible, and it's going to be a serious mind mess. But let's try to nail it down. So a few principles of Hegel is this: man can only become God when he is complete. God created the universe and man so that God could know himself. I'm going to read all this and then explain. Man is the mirror that reflects God. This comes from Hermeticism, by the way. But humanity is holding the mirror wrong. Only humans can know God because of knowledge. God created humans, which are Homo sapiens, the wise man, to love and know himself. Hegel himself will get man to hold the mirror properly. What does this mean? Hegel comes to a series of conclusions from, I don't know if on drugs or deep thinking or just being weird, that how does he know that he exists is his mind. Therefore, how does he know that God exists? His mind. God cannot exist. Hegel cannot exist without God. Therefore, God cannot exist without Hegel. What does that mean after this assumption? It means that man is the mirror of God. If God can only see himself or exist, if Hegel or man exists, it means that the eyes of man are the eyes of God. And the only way for God to see himself is through the eyes of man. Therefore, man is a mirror of God. Does it make sense? It doesn't have to. That's not the point. I have no idea.
It does.
Right? But this is sure. Again, that if it does or does not, that's not the point here. You know, it's
Am I the
to
only
each his own.
Christian on the panel? Because I'd speak to that.
Yeah, I think you're the only Christian on the panel, but yeah, again, this is the core of his beliefs. Now I want to get into something else. Where does Hegel get? There's one person I skipped on purpose because I wanted to save it only for this part after I start talking about it. There's one person that I skipped in the timeline that Hegel truly loved and was Hegel's inspiration for a lot of this. It's a guy named Jacob Boomer. It's a philosopher from the 16th century, and he was a Christian philosopher, and he came up with a very similar logic, but before Hegel. And yeah, stressed.
Well, I think before we move too far past it, like what you had stated of God cannot live without Hegel and Hegel without God, I think that's a relatively common Christian belief in today's era that we are his children, we're his manifestation, that kind of mirror image. So I think that his assertion kind of helped form a lot of Christian philosophy in the modern day church today because um, well, like like well, I know we haven't touched on Nietzsche, but he says God is dead, but he's alive in all of us. I think that's a lot of what Hegel was trying to touch on there is that the concept and the fundamental understanding of Christianity and a Trinitarian God cannot exist without man and the will of man, because you can't explain God and the Trinitarian Christian belief without mankind and their influence.
Sure, that's great. That I did not know that. That's awesome. It's good to have a Christian on the panel because again, a lot of this is more of until a certain part when we get into the real weirdness. A lot of it is a lot of Christian philosophy, and a big Christian philosopher that Hegel got a lot of inspiration from is Boomer, that had a similar cycle prior to him, but he arrives at a different point that then Hegel takes some inspiration from. This is Boomer's cycle. God can only know himself through man, very similar to Hegel so far. But here is where he differs, and this is where Hegel is going to take a lot of inspiration, and not only Hegel, but the people after Hegel that recognized where Hegel got the inspiration from. They will, again, I have to say this before we continue. A lot of this, and why I describe it as a cult, right, is it's very one way on the surface. But then when you start to understand where these people took their inspiration or meaning from, you start seeing the curtain, right? You start seeing what they're trying to hide from you, in a sense. And it will get way clearer as I go. But again, let's go back to Boomer's cycle. God can only know himself through man. Man in the Garden of Eden had no knowledge. Therefore, he wasn't reflected. He wasn't a reflection of God. Because God can only know himself. Man could only know God through knowledge. Then here's a little contradiction from him, but he fixes it immediately. Even after the fall from Eden, men were still not fully conscious. Only after Jesus, they got the opportunity to. So, and then the last point, the Trinity is the teaching of wisdom to man. And this is where actually the dialectics come from, which I will touch on soon, but keep the Trinity in mind, because Hegel loved the idea of the Trinity, and he developed the dialectics from it. So Boomer's cycle is very different, but it harpers a bit more on Christianity. It's basically the same thing, but it gives Christian history, or not even Christian and Jewish history to some extent with the Garden of Eden, into his philosophy. He tries to put it on the timeline of religion. Is not only God created man to see himself, but God created man, put him in the Garden of Eden. The man in the Garden of Eden had no knowledge. Therefore, God had to banish him from the Garden of Eden. Even though he ate from the tree of knowledge, he still wasn't conscious enough. And then when Jesus came, he had the opportunity to be conscious. Okay. Now, I want to take everything we learned until now, from the history of the thought and Hegel, into the next point, right? Until the next point. And remember a lot of Heraclitus, because Heraclitus is going to be a massive inspiration here. And Halsey, next time we do something like this, we need something where I can share stuff, because it's probably so hard to follow, and it will just get hard to follow from now on. But
in the nest.
It's written down, and I don't think anyone can read my handwriting.
Well, this whole thing will be on YouTube later, so I'll upload sources and I'll put them in the description.
Okay, sounds good. So when we take everything we learned until now, with a big focus on Heraclitus, which was a massive inspiration for Hegel, we get Hegel's next point. And Hegel's next point, if we combine everything we learned until now together, is change is everything. Nothing remains the same. This is directly from Heraclitus, right? This is Heraclitus's famous sentence. Now, he builds on that and he says, change requires a contradiction. The world is constantly changing. Therefore, the world is made of contradictions. Change, again, and this is something I want you guys to remember, to harpen to the beginning of what I said, which is a cult, in order to grasp you, needs you to question reality and question reason and logic. So here's where we start getting into a little bit of it. Change is the destruction of something previous and the beginning of something new. In German, Aufheben. That's a term Hitler used all the time, and it means to abolish and transcend. It means to overcome the contradiction and make something new. This is where, by the way, revolution, which is communism, action, which is fascism, and movement struggle, which is National Socialism, that's where they all come from. Now, I'm sure the question you all have is, okay, Hegel, we need to transcend the contradictions. We need to overcome the contradictions. We need to do change. How do we do that? So now finally, after the longest intro in history of intros, we reach the point of this space. Dialectics. Dialectics is the secret way to overcome the contradictions and become the reflection of God. Now, we need to remember that according to Hegel, contradiction means this. Contradiction doesn't mean one or both are incorrect. Usually if we have a contradiction, right, what that tells us as regular human beings is one of them or two of them are incorrect. If 2 plus 2, one says 4, one says 5, at least one or both of them have to be incorrect. So Hegel says, no, thinking like this keeps you in the material world, right? 1 second, I just want to see. Right. Remember, we need to escape the material world. We need to escape this realm, right? And how do we do that? It's contradictions. If we let contradictions and we discard them, we will keep staying in the material world. So what do we do? According to Hegel, you take a contradiction and you tell it to synthesize them into a new option, right? Is 2 plus 2 4 or 5? I don't know. Here's something new. This is Hegel's belief. This is Hegel's way of the dialectic. Is when you have a thesis and you have an antithesis. How do you say it? How's the antithesis? Antithesis. Just before, because I'm gonna be saying that word a lot. Okay, I'll guess antithesis.
Antithesis.
Yeah, antithesis. So you need to negate them and make something new called a synthesis. But actually, Marxists and Hegelians hate that term. I don't know why. But so they use the word reconciliation. But I'm just going to call it synthesis because I don't care what they think. Yeah, Stress, what's up?
Well, with that being said, the antithetical of Hegel's dialectic would be essentially chaos. So I'm trying to understand the point you're highlighting here.
Oh, you're actually harping on something very good that we're going to get to later, because you're pretty correct, and you're going to see why you're correct is pretty scary. Okay. So why do we need this? Why do we need this whole, how is that going to help us? How is that going to help us transcend to God? And again, I need to remind you guys before I say the next sentence, it's not supposed to make sense. If it doesn't make sense to you, I don't know. Because again, I don't know if it's supposed to make sense, if it's supposed to, if it's supposed to be, if you don't believe it's the right way, don't come to me with complaints. This is Hegel, okay? After our new synthesis, right? After we create that synthesis, our new synthesis actually becomes our thesis, which then on itself will have an antithesis, a contradiction, which will then create a new synthesis, and so on 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 and so on, until Hegel says we will reach God. And just a point, when Marx says material dialectics, he claims in a lot of his books that he disagrees with Hegel, which he says, no, Hegel sees the history of humans as a contradiction cycle. I see it as a class struggle cycle. First of all, same thing. But he doesn't want you to know that. So he coins an innocent term called material dialectics, right? Which he says, no, I just believe it's dialectics, but with material things. But don't fall for it, because as I said, they like making things vague to not show you what they truly mean. They want you to be behind the curtain, right? Stress, go ahead. Stop me whenever you want, man.
I'm sorry, man. I love theological debates, and philosophical. So essentially, I find the distinction between Marx and Hegel and his real critique of Hegel's works is that it relies on this almost entropic version of society that will continuously eat its own tail, as you stated. Every time there is a cycle of renewal, a new antithesis is formed, created an Ouroboros or an Ouroboros effect of a society essentially creating this cycle of chaos, which I know you said that without Hegel's dialectic, the world does reach chaos, and we'll touch on that later, but I think that was Marx's biggest critique of the Hegelian dialectic was it is essentially a self-fulfilling yet self-defeating prophecy where entropy has no law in the natural world, and without entropy you cannot truly experience change or growth.
You are 100% correct, and that is exactly what Marx wanted you to believe he thought. And that's why he said it in his most mainstream books. But I'll get to after, and you'll see the point where I'll get to it after, and why he shows himself he doesn't think so. And he thinks something else, which I will cover now, but then we will see later. He believes in material dialectics. And if you take material dialectics into its literal sense, and after you'll see with the later Marx quotes, because I'm trying to stay on Hegel, the only difference between Marx is Marx wants to call it material dialectics because he believes this dialectics, the dialectics we've had until now, is material because it comes from the material reality. Let's leave this aside and we'll go back to that later. Now, after this whole cycle of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? If we keep doing that, we reach God, according to Hegel. Now comes the final contradiction. If one of our synthesis becomes God, that means, according to dialectics, that God will become a thesis, and that God will have an antithesis. And therefore, you can never actually finish the cycle, because even if you reach God, God is just the new thesis, and he will have an antithesis, and it will never end again. So Hegel has a great answer. He says, I'm not going to answer it. I'm just going to cheat. And he says, in order to get to the final God from God, right, you must destroy your mind and become everything and nothing at the same time. And to do that, you have to destroy your mind, your consciousness, your conscious mind, getting closer to the Garden of Eden, where we were the closest to God. Remember, from Boomer, Hegel gets that when were we the closest to God? In the Garden of Eden. What was the difference between us and the humans, quote unquote, from the Garden of Eden? Is knowledge, is the act of knowing. How do we get to the act of knowing? Is by destroying our minds, by becoming everything and nothing at the same time. And how do we do that? Is with dialectics. And here Hegel reveals a little bit of what, in the end, a lot of his later on cult leaders will go on to use to destroy the human mind, to become animalistic, as Hitler called it, the marching masses, right? To turn the public into an unthinking mass, the marching masses. 1 second. Let me see. I have a few things I want to go over.
But
go ahead.
The logical conclusion of that would make the people an anathema to the state, and vice versa. So I get what you're leading here. I like the structure. Hegel is a walking, talking contradiction in everything he says.
Yes, and exactly. He's a walking, talking contradiction, and he wants the rest of humanity to be that because he believes that will get us closer to God. Here's a Hegel quote. I saved a lot of quotes, but I didn't save where to say them, so I'm hoping this goes in here. No, this actually I went over already. Let me see. Actually, I want to harper back to the first thing I touched on, which was fascism, right? And again, this is a whole circle that completes itself when I say this makes no sense. But when you read the source material, when you read what they're trying to get you to do, you start to understand. Now, in the beginning, I said that for fascism, you need three components: nationalism, syndicalism, and what the father of fascism coined actualism. Or, and another way that he said it, actual idealism. If we take actualization, the meaning of actualization is self-completion. That's the meaning of the word. When you take the word ideal doesn't actually, in philosophy, doesn't always mean idea. It means God. Ideal is God. When you combine the two, actual idealism, you get the meaning that he's trying to hide from you without behind the curtain of gibberish, long sentences, and nothing that makes sense, is the self-completion of God. And this is a small tidbit to what I want to harper on, that the first cult leader was Hegel. After him came a lot of cult leaders, and they used this destruction of the brain to make followers, the best followers of all time, zombies, basically, right? Let me see other stuff that I have here that I have saved.
Quick touch on what you just stated, though. With fascism being a result of action and things of that nature, I believe, I think you might be missing on this one here. I think Hegel's entire premise is all of these kind of isms and political dialectics essentially lead back to this same point of a hierarchical structure. And I think that's often not touched too highly in Hegel's theorems of his importance of hierarchy, because I'm not sure he really truly knew how to frame it.
It's more than that. I agree with you, and it's more than that. It's, first of all, the contradiction thing, the change, the movement. What we learned from Hegel, and what a lot of people after understood, is that Marxism, fascism, Nazism are the change, are the process, the synthesis, right, to get from one place to another. And that's why I told you earlier, is with Hegel's thing, without it, it would be chaos. Hegel is the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis is a whole mix of things that he started. He almost kind of predicted his own future, to be honest. And I want to give a few examples, right? I said I won't touch on Hitler this time because he was inspired a lot also by other people, not just Hegel. Even not mostly by Hegel, even though he took a lot of his indoctrination methods directly from Hegel. But one of them is, Hitler always said, right, National Socialism is not a party. It is a movement. And what does he mean by that? All of those things, Marxism, fascism, Nazism, they are the change. They are not the goal. They're not here to give you an end point. They're here to accelerate history, as Marx and Stalin said. And what does that mean, right? Those whole movements, that's why it's so hard to define them. That's my original question. Why is it so hard to define them? It's because they're meant to be hard to define, because they don't embody anything but change itself. That's all they're here to do, right? And
I mean, that's why you get the constant revolutionism out of any type of socialist leaning, whether it be National Socialist, communism, Marxism, collectivism. It is never truly at an end stage. And we see that now currently in today's age with the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party, you had the very famous Sino-Soviet split, speaking on what Noam's talking to about this Marxist-Leninist version of socialism. to where you had this massive Sino-Soviet split in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s that we have now somehow managed to mend through U.S. foreign policy at our own detriment, to this almost never-ending cycle of repeated revolution that we have seen take place in all socialist societies, everywhere outside of liberal democracy, which is entropy made manifest. And I think that's something a lot of people don't understand in the political sphere. What is happening to Europe and the United States is purely and completely by design. It is not a bug. It is a function of the system. Entropathic decay is always the end stage of any sort of liberal democratic society. Hence why you get Marxism, fascism, socialism, nationalism. It is this never-ending change. Sorry, I went on a rant there. No, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's great. That's great. Exactly. And that's what I'm trying to embody here, is that all of those movements, and I hope next space or whenever next time we do this, I can harpen a bit more on the dangers of what they do. I just wanted to bring the history of it, right? All they're here to do is change. All they're here is to fulfill the dialectical synthesis of Hegel, to constantly be on the up, on the higher, right? When someone calls himself woke, when someone is awake, what are they awake to? If you ask Hitler, for example, he was awake to third positioning. He was awake to the fact, in his mind, that his thesis and antithesis of his time were capitalism and communism. And he knew that his job, right, his calling, quote unquote, in the dialectical process, which he talks about a lot, is to create the new synthesis. And his new synthesis was National Socialism. And that's where we get the, or as he called it, third positioning, which is same thing. Now I want to move to the other point that inspired Hegel from the works of Heraclitus, which is another series of points that kind of ties it all together, and then maybe we can get to why communism, Marxism, fascism is all it is, because these points really tie in a lot of it together. So we accepted that everything is change. We accepted that everything's a contradiction, right? So now here's the next part. If everything is change, that means that nothing is real, which is, by the way, modern dialectical materialism. And remember in the beginning how I told you, for a cult to capture you, they need two things essentially. They need to break your logic and they need to break your reality. So we broke logic, right, by third positioning. Nothing makes sense. Everything is changed. If there's a contradiction, take the middle. Don't look for logic. Why would you look for logic? Don't look for the thing that's going to advance you on a logical way. You don't need that. If there's a contradiction, it's good, and that is an opportunity to make a synthesis, to just create more contradictions forever and ever and ever in your mind until you break your mind and you become one with God. So they broke contradiction. So now Hegel goes on to break your reality. If everything is change, nothing is real. Or as Heraclitus says, nothing is, everything is becoming. Everything we perceive as real is part of the realm, which is the realm of appearance. But the other realm is reality, according to Heraclitus. And by the way, Plato takes this concept as well, and this is where we get the famous meme painting, whatever, of the shadows on the wall, on the cave walls, that Plato takes Heraclitus's reality versus appearance realm and puts into a little bit of more practical thinking. But so what we need to assume is that our worldly reason is fake. Everything you know is fake. Everything around you is fake. If everything is changed, nothing is real. Nothing stays the same. Nothing is what it seems. Everything's a contradiction, and you have to break your brain to become one with God. As I said, if they can get you to reject logic, they can get you to reject reality. If they can get you to reject reality, they can make you believe whatever they want. And that was the playbook that Hegel left on to his followers, that took that super effective playbook and managed to really ruin the world with it, if I'm being honest. And again, they hide a lot of their belief in this theory in plain sight in a lot of ways. As I said, it's a cult. And the curtain is dialectics. And behind the dialectics, they believe one thing, but with dialectics, they make you believe something else, right? So if we tie in all of Hegel's dialectic belief together, right? The point of the dialectic is to come to the end of history, to become God, to go back in history, back to the time of the Garden of Eden, where we knew nothing. Basically a doomsday cult. Yes, stressed.
I would kind of argue that, good sir. I think that the end stage of the Hegelian dialectic is not necessarily to become God, but to understand him. I don't think
Well, again, remember that according to Hegel, there is no difference between you and God because everything essentially is in your brain, including God.
Here's where we reach the crux of my imposition here, is that to understand God, man must understand himself, because if we are truly a reflection of God, then to understand oneself is to understand God. And I think that's what Hegel was trying to point to, not of us trying to become God. Because as a Christian, and I think, I don't know Hegel's mind, I wasn't alive in his time, but he does have a Christian basis to his ideology. I would say that his interpretation would be more geared towards the understanding of God, not the becoming of one, because as a Christian, we all know that we will forever fall short of his grace and glory. There is no comparison. I could never be as God or God-like or Christ-like. I could never embody that as a mortal man full of sin, born into sin. And that is, as you touched on earlier in the conversation, when Adam ate the fruit of the tree of good and evil, like the knowledge of the tree of good and evil became succinct and understanding of his own mortality. That's why they felt shame of their nakedness in the garden, is more of a reflective point of introspection from the Christian perspective of, I know not what I was doing until it was shown to me that it is to be flawed. So to better understand God's will, I must better understand myself as to not repeat these same mistakes. I do believe that I appreciate your perspective, but I do believe at a fundamental level that you misunderstand what Hegel was truly trying to achieve. It was not to become God or to become closer to, but to understand why God made us in his image, and to understand that image in and of itself will forever be a never-ending and self-fulfilling prophecy of birth and of death and rebirth, because no man in his mortal flaws and all of his sins is ever going to truly come close to or conceptualize the understanding of God. And I think that's where we reach this almost antithetical circle of which you were speaking, to where in the pursuits of our understanding, we seek our own destruction. I'll end with that one.
No, of course. I'll say one thing. Of course, both of us could be right. That's the whole point of Hegel. But I think you're coming to this from a very Christian perspective, which is understandable. But you should come to it from a Hegelian perspective, because Hegel was Hegelian first, Christian questionably second.
Fair enough.
Yeah. First, Hegel believed that in order first to understand God, you have to become God. In order to become God, again, is to understand God, but it's a circle. So in order to understand God, you have to become God. And how do you become God? First of all, again, Hegel doesn't see himself and God as two different things. That's why he loved the idea of the Trinity. He didn't see himself separate from God, right? He as he said, I'm not going to quote him directly because I don't remember the quote, when I die, God dies. He truly believed in his weird mystical mind that him and God is no different. But he's broken. God is broken. God is not God yet, and he has to break his mind to get to God, but not to get to understanding God, but to literally become God. The synthesis won't become to understand God, it will literally become God. Right? So I understand where you're coming from because it's a very Christian perspective, but you need to remember that Hegel tried, in a sense, not to break Christianity, but to break the mind. And part of it is to break Christianity because it's a preconceived notion of your brain, which comes from the material realm, where he does not prescribe that God or your brain can truly be. Your brain can only be in the, how Heraclitus said, the reality realm, and we are in the appearance realm. So everything that we appear to see is not reality, including how we understand God. And in order to understand God, we have to become God. Again, this doesn't have to make sense, but that's what the dude believed, you know. Um,
I'm aware of I'm aware of how you're framing it. I'm just the only one up here on the panel to sit here and interact with you. So yeah, I'm not trying to be a contrarian about this,
oh,
but
of course, I really appreciate it, man. I really, again, we need this discussion to also fill in time, and also I want to know where people don't
well,
understand. You know?
to touch on what you were just seeking, I think this is where we come to essentially the true crux of Hegel's philosophical dilemma that he had really kind of struggled with to form his political theory, because I do believe that the Hegelian dialectic, in terms of a political theorem and the dialectic on which the world operates today, very much comes from an internal struggle where Hegel had of this understanding of, yes, you are God. All of us are made in God's image. I think Jews and Christians kind of share this belief that we are all the children of God. We are all a reflection of him. So, but to become him and to understand him, to say that you cannot understand without becoming, I think he had a fundamental flaw here, because me as a Christian today, in modern day Sodom and Gomorrah, which is the United States, it is, I am a child of God, so I am a manifestation of him, but I know that I can never become him. So I think that was this kind of philosophical struggle, to where, as you had rightly pointed out, that Hegel believed himself to be on par with God, this omnipotent force that one cannot exist without the other, to where we get to this self-defeating prophecy of it, when Hegel passed, then God is supposed to pass. And as I brought up earlier in the conversation, when Nietzsche had said God is not dead, but he is alive in all of us, that came very much later down the line after Hegel's original thought process. And here we are talking about it today in 2025. So I think that inherently, what Hegel was truly trying to come to grips with in its formation of his political theory was his own feeling of sort of an inadequacy, that I could never measure up to what God is, therefore I must try to become him and emulate him, and only to find that it'll be for a forever wanting cycle, hence the basis of his political theorem of a never-ending cycle of death and rebirth.
Very, very well said. And again, you said a word here that exactly, you said the word becoming. And we need to remember where Hegel gets a lot of his ideas of God about, which is Heraclitus. The sentence becoming comes from Heraclitus. That again, everything in the universe, in everything, is change, or everything is becoming, as Heraclitus said. That includes God, again, in their view. God cannot be something, because everything's changing. So again, you're right. Hegel did have a very bad perspective here, and in my opinion, he listened to a lot of people who were pretty primitive, in their thinking. But yeah, he definitely had a flaw here, which is first that everything's constantly changing, which you can argue here and there, but that God as well then. And especially if your mind, which is the way God perceives itself, always changes, and everything changes, especially in the quote unquote appearance realm, then God himself would change all the time. And you have to break that cycle. You have to become God by losing your consciousness. And to end, really, I want to prove my point that everything here is a curtain. And it's pretty much a doomsday cult, accelerating their way throughout history. A good Stalin quote for this, by the way, not the quote I'm going to say, but a good Stalin quote to prove that it's not just my thoughts, it's quote unquote Hegelian priests after Hegel that believe in that as well. Here's a quote from Stalin. Again, I didn't write the where the quote is from. I saved it somewhere. I can hand out the bibliography later. The pursuit of the proletarian party is to, quote, and this is directly from Stalin, take action. We learned about action. We learned about change, right? We learned about, right, the synthesis. Destroy the reactionary forces. Again, remember, what does that mean? Again, if you don't know all of this, if you don't know what the dialectics are, what they're trying to achieve, it would mean something completely different to you. Destroy the reactionary, destroy the antithesis, become a synthesis. Seize the means of production and thereby accelerate the process of history. This is a direct quote from Stalin. And if you don't know, if you don't know, or if you didn't listen to this space, you would have no idea what he's talking about. But now you do. And I want to end it with a quote by Marx. And it's going to be a very convoluted and pretty long quote, but bear with me. This is from Marx. In broad outline, the Asiatic, ancient, feudal, and modern bourgeois models of production, he always loves talking about models of production, may be designated as epochs marking in the economic development of society. The bourgeois mode of production is the last antagonistic form of the social process of production. But the productive forces developing within the bourgeois society create also the material conditions for a solution of this antagonist, the synthesis. The prehistory of human society accordingly closes with this social formation. And again, to put it with everything we learned in plain English, because Marx did not like being plain, is he means history did not happen yet. Before we get to any history, we need communism, which to his mind is, again, he believes it in a very shorter way of the dialectics of everything until now was the thesis and antithesis. The prehistory, the history of humanity is going to be communism, which is the synthesis. Yes, Stressed.
Well, and now here's where I've always tried to pick apart Soviet socialism, is what Marx was describing, the removal of the reactionary so that the revolution can be continuous, to where the modes of production are always going to be changed, et cetera, et cetera. It is almost, as you stated at the crux of this conversation, the antithesis of Hegel's synthesis, to where if you remove the reactionary, you defeat the Hegelian dialectic entirely, because three parts have to take place for the Hegelian dialectic to occur. A problem, usually implemented or perpetuated by the state actor themselves, the reaction of the people, and then a prefabricated solution. So for the Hegelian dialectic, at least in the modern sense, and how it is used in our body politic and geopolitics today, is that framework of problem, reaction, solution. And why Soviet socialism failed, and why all socialism will inevitably fail, is to remove the reactionary, to silence the dissent, to excise the empathy or entropy within a society, is to remove essentially the primary cycle of that rebirth and death. And that is why Soviet socialism inevitably withered on its vine, is because you have this beautiful birth cycle of a collectivizing ideal. And then when you remove the reaction, the pushback, the Alexander Solzhenitsyns of the society, you die on the vine. Entropy sets in. Without the reaction, there can be no cycle of rebirth, and without rebirth, and the anthropic aspect of society, which has been shown throughout all of human history, that all societies are anthropic. They will die on the vine. They will consume one another and themselves before ever accepting change. Is essentially an inevitability. So I think that's where Marx fundamentally had a flaw.
So that's the thing. You can consider it a flaw, or by the reaction of his Marxist priest after. What if it wasn't a flaw? Maybe that's what they believed will be, and they believed accelerating the chaos is the end of history. And to frame it in a more poetic way, what if the 60 million people who died in the Cultural Revolution, or the tens of millions of people who died in Soviet Russia, what if they were the process? What if they were not mistakes? What if they were the acceleration of history and they recognized?
Well, now, see, I knew this was coming here, and I've been waiting for this, because this is where we get into my favorite part of this entire discussion. That is the Machiavellian immorality of the modern global stage. But I think you're going to steer. I think you're going to steer into that, so I'll keep my mouth shut until that comes up.
No. Steer right into it. We can get. I didn't plan on talking about that, but we can get into that if you want.
Well, now, see, this is where that I find, in terms of like geopolitics and international relations, to be so thoroughly fascinating, is because you have this writ large. Almost every society will follow the Hegelian dialectic in some way, shape, or form. But here we come to the crux of it. There's morality in Hegel's worldview, to where it may be objective, but morality still exists. And then we look at the liberalization and sort of this Renaissance period and the restructuring of Hegel's original dialectical ideals into this almost Machiavellian immoral framework, to where this cycle of entropy no longer touches you at a personal level, is the best way I should frame this. During all the time periods being discussed, as Noam has talked about, you knew what was happening because you saw it firsthand through your own eyes. Now, we are so detached from the machinations of our political allies that we have no conceptual understanding of the empathy that was necessary for this cycle of rebirth in the Hegelian dialectic, for this death, change, renewal, recycle, this thesis, antithesis to occur. There must be a basis in morality, or the status quo will simply prevail. And I'll land on that one.
No, yeah, exactly. And to take it into a modern approach, right? What all of this did is I like looking at all of this, the dialectic, and see the kind of effect it did on modern life. The whole, a woman is not a woman anymore. Completely dialectic. And maybe a reactionary to it may be an antithesis to a thesis, but it's truly destroying our modern world. That whole, nothing is concrete anymore. Everything is abstract, and trying forcibly to in a lot of ways, really, in the modern world, to force us into the synthesis, whatever it may be, right? That, again, it's all rooted in this train wreck of ideology that was bottlenecked itself into the most devastating ideologies we've known in thousands of years, really. By the way, Halsey, I'm pretty much done with this. If you want, you can cut the recording here, and here we can just go into more discussion and talk about whatever, if you want.
I'll just leave it go.
I'll keep the discussion recorded, sir.
Yeah, I'll just keep it going in case something brilliant gets said.
Yeah, you don't want to cut. We might possibly have the next savant step into this space. But please, ladies and gentlemen, come up. You've been listening to all three of us sit here and babble, and I don't know how, of all people on this panel, that I was somehow the chosen one to come up here and debate this. But I don't know. Either way, you come up and talk about this, because I think that the understanding of how dialectics truly function will really help kind of galvanize a lot of people's opinions on the machinations of geopolitics, to where we all kind of live in a sort of a bubble, right? I'm only have such a fervent interest in this subject because, well, I'm weaponized autism made manifest, and this just happens to be my little autistic tick. I love knowing how the human brain works. So, that all being stated, please come up to the panel and have a conversation. By the way, Noam, check your DMs, good sir. I appreciate this conversation, gentlemen. Really do.
Of course, we'll check in a second. Halsey, give us some thoughts.
I'm kind of like listening more than have my own thoughts. The dialectic of all of the modern isms they really help when you look at the background of all of this, and you look at the absolute wackiness of the religious aspect, which I thought you were going to get into as well, of communism, of Nazism, and how they require an antichrist view of occultism, where the shit that they believe is just off the wall because it's so relevant to today. You know, like in order to reject God now, people are venturing into the same level of lunacy that they did with communism, with Nazism. Like we were talking yesterday about Nazism believing in it, basically Atlantis, and communism believing in the death of all humans. Like, it becomes very relevant in this discussion to talk about that the defining movements of our lives, the ones that have seen the deaths of millions of people throughout the world, have all been very rooted in very weird occult theology.
Well,
Stress, you don't have to pick your hand up, man. You can just interject.
You know I like to be polite, good sir. I've been an asshole for too long in my life to not be polite now. So, in that regard, Halsey, you bring up a great point, because I think the fundamental misunderstanding of dialectics and how they operate in the modern geopolitical sense have led a lot of people to fundamentally forget the key principle of all of these isms, which is a cult of personality. And I, as an American, I'll openly criticize my own government. Donald Trump is 100% a cult of personality. And the fact that most of my countrymen simply cannot see it is horrifyingly scary to me. And that to me is, I mean, I voted for the man 3 times. So I'm not a never Trumper, but the examples of dialecticals, the dialectic narrative being steered here in America is made manifest in Donald Trump's simple appointment to political office. Because through this sort of manipulation, this problem reaction solution, they were able to get a lifelong Democratic super donor who on camera said I would run as a Republican because they're dumb enough to vote for me. A man who in the first Republican primary debate walked on stage, looked at the people on the podium, looked at the audience, turned back to the people on the podium, turned back to the audience, said, and I quote, "I have bought and sold everybody on this stage. I know exactly how the system works," and was met with thunderous applause. So dialectics have worked so well in the manipulation of the American body politic to go from this sort of this neoliberal sense of a constitutional republic on which our nation was founded to we clap and bark like seals. And you can see dialectics made manifest in the American body politic. We have a 250-year track history where you can watch a beautiful ideal of a nation slowly wither through entropic acceptance on the vine until we have this multiculturalistic, almost a blend of hedonism and sardonism of a society today. And I think I'll land my plane with that.
Can you define dialectic?
In the literal sense of the world? Oh, it's stress. Sorry.
Yeah, Noam, you take this one, because my definition would be the modern iteration of how Hegel's theories have been made manifest in the body politic, and that is a problem reaction solution, as I stated earlier in the space. the governmental bodies of the world today will essentially either orchestrate or allow a particular problem to occur. They will gauge the people's reaction on said either orchestrated or allowed issue to happen, and then they will offer a prefabricated solution. And I think that is how the Hegelian dialectic functions today. It is a wonderful tool of mass control, and it has been since the French Revolution.
Perfectly said, yeah. If you want to get to the literal meaning of what Hegel meant, again, but as I said, the meaning is not there to mean anything. It's there to bring away the change. Dialectics, according to Hegel, is the process of which you will become God, or in another way, how history works, and therefore the future as well. Squirrel, go ahead, please.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I don't get to talk on Spaces as much as I would like, but I know a little bit about a lot of different things and a lot about very few things. The Hegelian dialectic is one of those things that I've been trying to understand for years, but at the same time, like, I don't feel like I have it fully grasped. But my main concern is, for the most part, over the time, has been whether or not this is evidence of there being some kind of global orchestration of some sort or not, and whether or not that should really affect our daily lives too much per se, and how much freedom we have personally in regards to if that is true, and what any individual themselves can possibly do to try to extricate not only themselves maybe from such a thing, but to be aware of it, and maybe to also help others as well in some way, shape, or form. So, I mean, I have ideas and questions, not so much long explanations about this thing.
So I can give you the Hegelian answer, right? Because Hegel actually touched on freedom in one of his more coherent rants. And it semi answers your question because I don't have an opinion on it. I'm forming an opinion, you know? But according to the man who introduced dialectics, just as everything else, freedom is fake. Freedom is changing. And but what does he mean by fake is it almost more, I would say that um, inspired Marx, I think, almost as much as dialectics themselves, is that Hegel believed the freedom that you perceive as freedom is fake in a sense of the classic example people like giving is in a free society, you have the freedom to choose if you want to wear a red shirt, for example. But Hegel comes in and tells you that's not freedom. Freedom is to understand why you want to wear a red shirt that day. Freedom is to understand that society or the dialectic or the reactionary or marketing even, maybe you want to wear a red shirt that day. So if that is freedom, I don't know. If that's freedom to you, that's fine, because, like a lot of people consider that freedom and are very happy with it. But that would be the Hegelian answer to that.
I'd have to push back on that and say it's a slight underrepresentation of Hegel's true thoughts on freedom. Because
go for it then. Go for it, please.
So there's several ways he kind of described freedom. Like his thoughts on self-determination. Essentially, the way I understand it is Hegel's thoughts on self-determination is to be autonomous, rational, and self-determining. Of whether or not your will to do so is free is not imposed of outside, but of one's not imposed by an outside force, but actually a product of your own mind, to where it is entirely up to your own understanding of what it truly means to be free, to be self-determining in your own life, is entirely constrained upon oneself, but not any outside or external force. And I think that's one of his main arguments with Kant and the concept of this liberalism or the liberal ideology. Is a lot of Hegel's critiques are more or less kind of pointed to be the abstract vein of the thought of this moralistic imposition that we have as a sense of freedom, especially as a Western society, because we kind of tend to attach morality to the concept of freedom when to be free is to essentially eschew morality. Because if you have a moral constraint, if you are simply aligning your concept of freedom with a Christian ethic of morality, that are you truly free? Are you constrained by the own strictures and regulations of one's mind, of your own moral code? And there's Hegel's thoughts on freedom. I mean, we could do a series of spaces on that, because that is a multi-hour discussion that people have debated for well over a century, and we aren't going to get to the bottom of here.
You explained it a million times better than me. Thank you for that. That's
Weaponized
way better.
autism, sir. Weaponized autism. This is one of my favorite subjects of all time.
Hell yeah, then great to have you for this discussion. Squirrel, yeah, go ahead. You don't have to raise your hand up. You can just interject.
I was just trying not to interject when somebody was in their flow, but yeah, no doubt. Like I tend to think, because of my stance and being Christian and understanding what the word says, as it were, that we are inherently already bound in a way, in a shape, in a form to not only the fall of man and sin and corruption, even in so much to be explained by those that might not believe in God, that we are bound to entropy, as it were, whether we like it or not. So true freedom is being, to me, able to operate outside of that binding of being stuck on death, decay, and entropy. And so being able to act in accordance in a way that actually builds towards the opposite, that is building life, creating life, sustaining life, and even in so much as the ideas of love and peace and joy and the things that are mentioned as fruits of the spirit, as it were, that to me, that is true freedom, because otherwise I am stuck in this cycle that just keeps returning to death and entropy and decay. So I mean, coming from a Christian worldview, and potentially I would say also some other spiritual avenues as well, they would say that the true expression of mankind is not in the repetition of death and decay and destruction, but in building things towards our own sustenance, our own future, and life and love itself. So yeah. I love it. This is a good conversation, and yeah, like you said, the idea of the understanding of freedom, especially even in the realm of Hegelian stuff, could really go for days on end. I get it. So thank you.
Well, I'd like to touch on what you had just touched, because well, me and you are the only Christians on the panel, as well as I'm aware, and I would like to expand on what you had discussed with the concept of freedom through the Christian ethic. I think that one of the main sticking points we run into when it comes to this dialectic of, especially from the Christian perspective, is this almost dismissal of the concept of entropy, that to not center and focus on it, where to me, as a follower of Christ, I embrace the anthropic decay of my life. I know that my life is a short, fleeting glimpse in the span of the cosmos, and I welcome the anthropic, to where I know that when my soul leaves my mortal coil, as was brought forth earlier in this conversation by Noam very brilliantly, is this discussion of the abstract concept of the soul to one's body, our connection to God, to where I will embrace the entropy of the world, because I am of the world and I am sinful, and I know that when my anthropic cycle is done, I will walk forever in the kingdom of heaven alongside my Lord. And to me, that is a blessing, not a curse to be mired upon or think of in any way, shape, or form as a negative aspect of one's life. You should welcome one's death, for we shall be forever closer to the Messiah in the becoming of it.
I thank you. That's a really good point, because like I more often would consider the gain, or not so much the yeah. So the gain part of that, rather than to live as Christ and to die as gain, as Paul wrote. Anyway, yeah, it's easy to get stuck looking in one direction and not view the whole picture. And even so, for those that don't believe in God, to them, it's foolishness. What we talk about, whether from a Jewish perspective or a Christian perspective, to people that don't believe and are stuck in the obsession with death, it's complete and utter foolishness to them. But if they would be able to allow themselves to at least take the risk, what do I want to say, like Occam's razor maybe, or something, like at least take the risk of being wrong in the pursuit of trying to understand where other people are coming from in their spiritual stance, even if you don't come to the same realization or understanding that they do. I also have taken a similar stance towards trying to understand atheist, agnostic, or anti-theist thoughts of different variety too, because when I was growing up, I became friends with somebody, and we both admitted that we wanted to pursue knowing what is the why of why we exist, and yet we went about it in two different ways. It's weird. He grows up and becomes a self-professed atheist, and I grow up and go through a lot of weird stuff, and then eventually come to the decision and knowing that I am Christian and that I believe in that, and then that will persist as far as my entire life. But then still trying to have these debates or even just discussions with him, it's helpful, because like he actually cares about my well-being. He cares like whether or not I live or die. So having these discussions with somebody that has some kind of moral, ethical alignment is better, it seems, most of the time than people that actually don't care whether you live, die, or otherwise. So yeah, no doubt. I'm not sure where else I was going with that. This is good.
Well, Squirrel, I don't like to do this, but good sir, the application of Occam's razor you just implied is misplaced. A simplistic version, and to help you better know where to apply the concept of Occam's razor, is never attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity or incompetence. So Occam's razor does not necessarily apply to the philosophical nor moral quandaries we are discussing in this conversation.
It's getting kind of
Maybe I'm mentioning the wrong construct. I know there's three that I've wrestled with often. So
yeah, I was just trying to kind of highlight the context of how to apply Occam's razor. I meant no slight in any way, shape, or form.
it's getting theological, but I like it. But it's interesting, what you bring up about, freedom. If we're, if I was totally free, okay, to do what I wanted to, right? Some would perceive me as being an evil man, right? Because if it was up to me, well, I'm not going to say it, but I would rid the earth of certain people. But I'm not free to do that. I mean, I could make that choice, but I'm bound by the law of my country. If I was to murder someone, I'm gonna either spend the rest of my life in jail, or I'm gonna be killed myself, or something of that nature. But when it comes to, how can one truly be free? And all I could keep thinking about was the one thing that everyone on earth has in common is, and you'll see where I'm going with this. The one thing everyone on earth has in common is you cannot free yourself from the clutch of death. Okay. However, all right, if you're a Christian, okay, or your religion believes in an afterlife after death, okay, but I'll stick to Christianity because I don't want to get into other religions, and I don't know much about other religions. Okay, you can free yourself from that clutch of death, and then in essence you're finally free. You're free. You don't have to, you're no longer,
Do you mind if I ask in what sense, Chris? Like how as a Christian can we flee ourselves from the crutches of death?
Well, according to the Bible, okay, if you become saved and you know, you confess to Jesus being your Lord and Savior, etc., then you're saved. Okay. Once you die on earth, okay, your body will die, but your soul will never die. You will have eternal life. So you are freed from the clutch of death.
Now, see, you know what?
So
That's a great point. I'm going to DM you in the back channel. I want to have a space with you about this because this is wonderful. The discussion of like the body dying but the soul living on. I would say Christians still do embrace death because many aspects of the soul are carried on through generations. So yeah, it's a great topic. I'm a DM you on that.
It's no, I think they embrace it, but not in a bad way. It's embraced because you know it's going to happen. But at the same time, if you're truly a Christian, and let me just forward this by saying I'm not a Christian, okay? But I was brought up in a Christian household. As a Christian, you no longer fear death. It's not something that's holding on to you anymore, holding on to your mind. You don't worry about it really, you know. Not as much as say an atheist would. And I don't care what anyone says. Okay, you can be an atheist, you can be a good person, but I guarantee you, in the end, there will at least be a few seconds where you will fear what's on the other side.
for sure, but Chris, you also bring up a good point. Is that when you look at the flip to it, right? People, when they have an overwhelming desire and ability to motivate people behind them, not just in their own thoughts but in their own philosophy, that without the constraint of law or morality or anything like that, they will tend to act on their base natures, right? Like communists believe that non-communists should be killed because communism is so perfect that for those that embrace it, the people that aren't going to stand up for it are in the way of eternal happiness for everyone, right? And if you believe that way, then whether you believe in an afterlife or not, you believe the afterlife will reward you for these kind of, bold actions that you take. And if you look at any religion, whether it be Christianity, Judaism, Islam, or any of them, there are dozens of examples of people who used violence to fulfill God's will. And we don't look at them negatively. We don't look at them as they've done something that's immoral or unconscionable. Whether it's the Old Testament with Pinchas and the spear, or in the New Testament when Jesus flipped over the tables, or whatever it may be, there's always been violence that's used to advance morality, and outside the constraints of society, that's exactly what will happen. And again, like you see, Stalin killed 60 million people, Mao too, Hitler even more than that, and they did so because of that unchecked connection to base desire that overrides the constraints of societal law.
So, to the one point I wanted to say, like, violence is, yeah, I don't think that's even completely inept to people that fully understand Christianity or Jesus Christ either, because he said that the kingdom of God since the beginning has suffered violence, and violent men take it by force. He even said that behold, that he doesn't come just to bring peace, but a sword. Like, so, I mean, even so, and then he had one of his apostles buy a sword before he was betrayed and stuff by one of his own, and then, like, yeah, even so, but like fear is a horrible master to have, and yet an incredible motivator for people as well. Like, at the same time, like, not to completely discredit it, but at the same time, like, it's like it seems almost totally opposite to love and the deepest characteristics of what God is, if you believe in God. So yeah, I wanted to touch on that. Love this so far. I'll stop.
I'm gonna throw a hand grenade into this conversation. So Hegel's philosophies and this whole concept of dialectics are centered around God. And now I will pose to you, in my opinion, the panoptical thesis that politics become religion in and of themselves. Because all religious, in terms of the Abrahamics, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, you cannot separate the political aspirations from the religious aspirations in terms of the way society functions in the modern era.
Well,
So
one
I
would say
will
they're the same. One would say there is no difference. Like if you look
exact.
at the way that communists adhere to their philosophy, or even more obvious, the way that atheists cling to their philosophy. Being an atheist requires almost more of a theism to justify than being a theist. Like in order to do so, you have to have a concrete description of your philosophy and how one adheres to it, and you'll have your levels of adherence to it as well. You'll have the zealots, you'll have the agnostic, and you'll have the faithful, right? So it's not, and back to I'm sorry, I didn't see who's the name of the person who said it, but when you think of a concept for society like love, right? Like love and hate exist only together. So if you base your political philosophy or political well-being or even your life philosophy on love, there has to be the counterbalance of that you hate those that don't adhere to or at least promote the concept of love. Again, it's like I said with communism, it's that you believe that this is the perfect philosophy. Therefore, the enemies of that philosophy are stopping humanity from the ultimate heaven. So you become to hate them or even see their entire existence as being unable to be pressured into your way of thought as almost an enemy or a devil or an antichrist or however you want to refer to it. So if you look, and I'm speaking from a Judaic perspective right now, there's a reason why Martin Luther and Marx and basically like all of these kind of ism philosophers always had an extreme opinion about the Jews, which was something that if Marx believed that religion was the opiate of the masses, then he would have written just as many, harmful and evil diatribes about Christians, about Muslims, about everybody, because he believed that religion was evil. But instead, he decided to focus on Judaism. Why? Because Judaism exists in a way that doesn't acknowledge the possibility of alternative philosophy. It's been a main driver of persecution for thousands of years. Christians believe in Christ, so therefore the church believed that the Jews' very existence was an affront to the survival of Christianity. And it's taken us, if we even want to assume that we've evolved past that, it's taken 2,000 years to do so. And the death of how many people in the Holocaust. So when you
No, but
look at,
hold on, Halsey. I refuse to allow the Holocaust to be attributed to Christianity.
I wasn't, not in the slightest. But and if I did so, I apologize because that wasn't my intent. My intent was that the Christian world existed majoritively in Europe until fairly recently. And even Christian communities outside of Europe were not considered influential on Christianity. They were considered adherents. So when I say that it culminated with the Holocaust, I don't mean that Christians committed the Holocaust. I meant almost the opposite. I meant those rebelling against Christianity with new philosophies, in this case, National Socialism. They, in order to abolish not just Christianity, but opposition, their most ardent opposition was to Jewish people. I wasn't suggesting that it was a Christian thing. I was actually suggesting the opposite, right? Because all of these things exist in opposites. And if you think
Fair
about
enough.
it before,
My apologies for the misunderstanding.
no problem. But because the point I was trying to make also was that if you look at, again, the flip around, is the Catholic Church had been involved in many persecutions of Jews. There was a fundamental disagreement on everything that they stood for many, many years. But when the rise of National Socialism, which was obviously hostile towards Catholics as well, came up, not only did they take a side against Hitler, they also took a very hard stance against Stalin, but they also became very conciliatory towards the Jews. It's almost like walk in my shoes and you'll know how hard my walk is, right? Like when they saw that they were not on the side of the majority anymore, and that they were on the side of the, even if you want to say they were the majority, but still they were suffering the violence of the minority, they understood that just wiping out the adherence to a political belief will most likely encapsulate you at some point. There'll be a point where you're not the one, producing the philosophy yourself. Therefore, you'll be on the opposite side of it. You'll be the subject of its rejection. So, again, I find it very easy because it's when you were having stress, when you were having your space with Rabbi Ori the other day, which I kind of liked, I kind of didn't. There were some aspects of it I didn't like. And we'll get into it another time. It's not worth like diving into now. But a lot of the arguments that were being made were, well, the scripture says X, therefore I believe it's incumbent on me to do X. Like, I believe it's written on my heart, or I believe that it's written in my deeds, or it's written in my good works. But if you...
Good sir. Good sir. I want to put this forward because I know this goes on many platforms. My space the other day was in no way reflective of my views in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and I'll second that. I wasn't even coming close to accusing you of it. The point that I was making is that when, as a Christian, you say those things, right? You say that it motivates me to be a good person, or it motivates me to do X, or implant this, or Jesus put this on my heart, or whatever the comments were of in the whole. In the end, there's still a fundamental belief that those that don't accept Christ will go to hell. So there's still the idea of, I'm making something palatable to you, but at the same vein, I don't believe that you're rejecting that philosophy will end well for you, not just in a sense of you'll be missing out, but you'll be punished. And Judaism has the same concept.
Well, I say dialectic. Obviously, I mean diametrically opposed. You have Judaism.
Right.
I mean, we have a very similar philosophy to where if you do not. Same with Islam. I mean, all the Abrahamics kind of have this moralistic black and white. Either you follow us or you are damned. So, I mean, we're kind of arguing the same point here.
Judaism doesn't have that, because Judaism has the Noahide laws, which are basically the idea that if you believe in God, the God of Abraham, that it doesn't matter whether you become an adherent of Judaism and keep the 613 commandments of the Bible. There are 7 commandments unto the nations, which are not like, it's not like stand on one foot for 17 hours a week and cut your hair off and like all of that. They're very standard 10 commandments type stuff. Is that the concept of heaven applies to all? Is that there's an afterlife for all, for moral behavior, as opposed to just strict religious stricture?
Well, that's a great point for part 2 of my space, because I mean, if Rabbi Ori can't do it, I'd like to have you as a co-host and argue that perspective of it.
Sure.
But on that note, I think we're wildly deviating from my hand grenade I tossed into this conversation.
So go for it. Repeat yourself, just so I don't want to deviate again. So repeat yourself.
I believe that politics has become religious doctrine in terms of the political dialectic we see today. And I'll highlight America because I am an American. So in terms of my nation in particular, politics has become almost so dogmatic that it's gained a religious fervor. I mean, in my country, just within my lifetime, fuck Trump alone, we have seen people disown members of their immediate family over a difference in political opinion. It has taken on almost this dogmatic religious fervor to where in the West, particularly in the United States, you are seeing it made manifest, to where now political dialectic has become almost a religious stance in and of itself. And that was the hand grenade I wanted to throw in here.
So I'm going to have some fun with this, because this is something I talk about all the time. And I don't even need to get into other philosophers. This is just something I say consistently. that a big part of the socialistic movement, or whether you want to call it the progressive movement, whatever you want to refer to it, of the modern leftist dogma, right, is to collectivize people so that you can judge them by their trash. If you take away their culture, if you take away their individuality, then you can always judge them by their trash. You could say, oh, well, Christians are bad because look what this Christian did. Because if that's how you identify yourself as your primary mode of being, then you have a responsibility to either own up to your trash and deal with it, or to accept that your trash is just as much a part of you. Now, America was very good at avoiding this for a very long time because of its individualistic nature. We were, like, when they say that America was a melting pot, I know I'm not talking about that we were just a dumping ground for the third world, but everybody, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but when I grew up, everyone identified.
Disparate ideas used to be able to be discussed. I'm 33, and
Okay.
me and you. This is why I respect you so much as a man, Halsey, and why, like I've mentioned to you at DMs. This is a fundamental change in my life. Speaking to people like you and Noam and Mitch, it's because I was never exposed to this, so it's a fundamental difference in the American body politic now, to where we are getting to a point to where there's no longer the discussions that you were able to have as you were growing up in this country, to where the common dinner table issues, so to speak, in the political dialectic are taboo, persona non grata,
Oh,
excommunicado,
no,
hereticus.
it's so much worse. I have to cut you off. It's so much worse than that. You didn't let me finish. Let me finish this one. It's so much worse than that. Because the kitchen table issues that people used to speak about were dealt with amongst cultural communities. If you look at who handled poverty, who handled medicine in the early days of our country, right up until basically the 40s, it was religious institutions, it was cultural institutions. That's where you went for loans. Like, even if you want to consider them bad, Italians went to the mob, Jews went to the loan society. You know, people, when they were sick, went to the church. When they were hungry, they went to the Catholic Church or the Catholic Charities. It's not that we can't talk about them anymore. When you collectivize everyone in a country this big, what you wind up doing is you make people identify by the worst type of cultural identity there is, and that's politics. Now, you're not a Christian, you're not a white, you're not any of that. What you are is a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative, things like that. And politicians, as everyone will tell you throughout history, are the worst people on the planet. They're either so astoundingly dumb that they have no idea what they're talking about, or they're so profoundly immoral that they take stands on things that are beneficial to them but not beneficial to society. So what winds up happening is now that you've collectivized everybody away from what was good about their culture, you've now collectivized them into the absolute worst part of our culture. Which is why me as a Jew, like, will now, in this new culture we live in, look at a leftist Jew that supports communism.
But are you not playing into that right now with your own statement? By me
We all
as a
are.
Jew, right
No,
there,
but
you just
no,
played into the
I did
collectivization that you're speaking about.
no. What I'm saying is the opposite. Is I'm saying that I see myself by my culture, and I don't define myself by my politics. What they want me to do is to see a leftist and ignore the fact that this person is a Jew or an American or a person from Germany or Ireland or any of the cultures that bring us together, and they want me to identify them by their politics, which is altogether only divisive by nature.
So we're kind of touching on the same vein of
Right.
this almost religious dogma of the political sphere in today's modern age has become so much to the point that no matter what defines you moralistically or on a physical or personalistic basis, like, you as an individual no longer truly matter.
Exactly, because collectivization takes away the best part of the dogmas that you define yourself by. So if you're defined by being a Catholic, you're defined by the principles of the church, right? And even though you can pervert them in certain aspects, there's still always going to be a counterbalance of people in your community and culture that understand that certain things are important and certain things are inherently, like, what we would call in America like a family value, right? When you collectivize people away from those things and collectivize them into politics, there is no morality to compare decisions to. There's only results. And so you can say, I don't care if we have to kill 10 million people. We need to get rid of racism, right? And those 10 million people are too racist to be allowed to live. Now you don't have a counterbalancing morality of killing people we disagree with is wrong, okay? Because there is no underlying morality to it. There's only an archetype of it. There's something you grew up with that, like, we don't have to read the Bible to know killing people is wrong. It's just a part of our archetype. But an archetype does not hold even close to as strong as a philosophy or a moral. So if you don't live by the morals of the church, you don't see a problem with killing people if it's for the right reasons. Even with the church, you could see it for the right reasons, but those reasons are so widely collectivized to people, to different communities, to different cultures, that you're not going to just go out and slaughter people if you have any concept of right or wrong or community, because then you'll be the king of the ashes. You'll just have burned everything down so that you can be the king of the ashes. But by collectivizing us by politics, we have absolutely no fundamental basis of good or evil. We only have a concept of winning, which is what politics is based on. So by doing that, it becomes the religion, it becomes the culture, and it's such a disgusting, dirty part of the culture and the religion that we can't even define what our principles are, right? Like, we can't define that killing people is wrong. We can't define ourselves by good must triumph over evil. We can't define ourselves by love of God is something that brings up children, or even having children in the first place is of value. Like, by using politics.
Thank you so much for so beautifully highlighting my point, Halsey. I mean, this is what, again, sir, this is why I have such deep respect for you. Like, the fact that me and you politically are on the opposite side of the spectrum, but you understand what I said to such a fundamental level that we can agree.
I agree with 99% of what you say.
So, but you're a Zionist, I am not.
Yes, you are. You just don't realize it. Yes, you are. You know what I mean? Let me expand before you get pissed at me. You're a Zionist just for Americans.
I mean, in that regard, I would consider myself I'm an extremist in the modern political era, but I am a nationalist for Americans and Americans only.
You want Zionism for your people. I want Zionism for my people. Doesn't make either of us less Zionist. It just means that we have different goals, which is why we can talk and converse and not want to kill each other, because my goals 99% of the time are not going to conflict with yours. So we want the same things. Whereas if you said I'm not a Zionist because I'm a communist, I wouldn't be able to have a conversation with you, because not only are you not a Zionist, meaning you don't believe in a freedom for your own people, but you believe in collectivizing your people into the general population to define by communism. So now we have nothing to really talk about, except unless you want to just have a debate. But because we actually believe in the exact same things, just for different people as our goal, there's absolutely no contradiction in what we talk about.
You know what? Damn. Yeah, I'm very, very rarely befuddled. But good sir, again, tip my hat to you. I will say this.
There was one person on the white nationalist side that used to say this. He doesn't say it anymore. He's more of a libtard now anyway. His name was Richard Spencer. I don't know if you've ever...
fuck that son. I'm sorry for this.
I have nothing but dislike for him myself. He wouldn't even debate me because he said I don't
my
dress nice
apologies
enough.
for cursing on your stream, but fuck that guy.
Bro, I curse more than anybody. Don't worry about it.
Bro, you're more than welcome to curse here. Seriously.
But what I'm saying is he used to say he doesn't understand how white people can counter-signal Zionism, because it's generally what they want for themselves. A white country that operates in the best interest of white people, that's, very exclusive to white people, and does not believe in the general blank slate theory that everybody is meant to live together. So at the same time, like, as I said, he's a libtard now, and he was an asshole then. But at the time...
But I think we can all, I mean, at least the people on the panel, we acknowledge our cultural disparate differences. By the way, shout out to my buddy Don't down here. I'm glad he's up here on the panel. But he
was with us the other day in the space. I enjoyed talking to him, actually.
Yeah, he's a great man. Great man. I think you two will get along swimmingly.
But I
But
understand what you're saying real quick. But as I said, it's the idea of being a nationalist is the fundamental concept of Zionism. And the opposite of what Richard Spencer said, but proving the same point. There used to be a guy who ran a lot of the debates, and it was J.F. Gariepi. I don't want to comment on him personally, but he's a white nationalist. Someone once asked him what his biggest fear is for the white race, and he said that we become the next Jews, that we become an eternal minority where everywhere we go, they blame us for everything, regardless.
But we already are. That's the fucked up part about
this was
whole
years ago
thing.
that he was years ago he said this. And what I'm saying is it's the same thing as counter-signaling Zionism, is that if you're willing to go down that road path, which I always say that JQ is a pathway to madness for every side, when you go down that path of blaming just one people for all of your misery, you're bringing it on yourself. It goes back to the dialectic that we were talking about before of the yin and yang, the counterbalance, everything. Is that when you blame the Jews for everything, you are going to eventually suffer from that same fate, because it's fundamentally based in a form of jealousy, and B, it's fundamentally based on a non-reality that can easily be turned against you. Because as I said, if there were no Jews in America, who do you think they would be going after always? Both sides. They would be going after the white population because they're overly successful. They have more successful schools. They have more successful families. They tend to get admitted to universities on a higher level. So that same jealousy or anger towards the Jews would just turn into the same conspiracies that you're hearing about white people, which is already basically started in the first place. Right?
Well, I mean, this we're getting way off the political dialectic spectrum here, but I would say,
We can. That's okay.
Well, I would tend to say that's because you have, while we're talking about the dialectic, I'll bring in the social and like the ethnopolitical zeitgeist into this conversation.
Sure.
And it's a truism throughout history that Jewish people are Jewish when it is convenient, and they are white when it is convenient. So then we get into the crux of like the Wignet argument, which is again why I said, because I don't give a shit what everybody else that I've known on here for years says. You guys truly have been very reasonable with me knowing my background, and this has been wonderful to come and learn. The typical Wignat perspective is that it's an undermining of the white ethnocentric Europeans by Jewish people to say, hey, we are white when it is convenient, but we are Jewish when it is not. Like, that's the main sticking point.
Well, there's two answers to that. Number one is we're Jewish when we want to be and white when we want to be is not something that we ever wanted. That was the collectivization that was forced on us. If you look at the Germans of Nazi Germany, and my grandmother was one of them, and she said this right up until she died, they couldn't get it. They didn't understand why the Germans were coming after them. They said we were Germans. They didn't consider themselves Jews. It was the Germans who collectivized them as Jews. They just saw themselves as Germans. They just saw Judaism as their religion. In America, you're not even allowed to write Judaism as your ethnic background. It's against the law. Maybe they'll change it one day, but if I go to register for Social Security and it asks me what my race is and I wrote either Middle Eastern or Jewish, they would come after me. That's a lie. I'm considered a white person. So it's a double-edged sword in that, and I explained this to Wignats 1,000 times, that you can't tell people they're white people until it's inconvenient and then get pissed at them when they grow up with almost a schizophrenic idea of identity, right? And it's, again, you see the same thing with white people here in this country, right? When they want to, you're white people. When they don't want to, you're Italian, or you're German, or you're Irish, or anything of the sort. And don't even get me started on half-breeds, right? Like, if you're half black,
Or
half
Nick
white,
Fuentes.
yeah, right. But I'm saying, if you're half black, half white, when you apply for school and scholarship and all of that, you're black. But in everyday life, you're not necessarily black. You might not even look black, right? And most people don't lump you in with being black. So it's part of the general collectivization that leads to these kind of things.
Fair point.
Halsey, sorry to interrupt. But what is your
Sure.
evidence that a Jew cannot define himself as such in America? Because you have protected identity laws in America. So what
No, you
function
have
of government is
anti-hate laws.
prohibiting?
You have anti-hate
That-
laws.
No, you have protection of identity laws. So there's no legal framework to stop you from defining yourself as a Jew in America.
There is to
my
officially
understanding.
define myself as a Jew. A Jew is considered a religion, which means that I can be the victim of a hate crime for my religion, but not for my cultural identity. That's I'm not allowed to define myself as a Jew. As I said, if I go to a government office and I'm filling out a form and it asks me my race, I have to write white. There is no
But
option.
here's where I would argue in how the law is applied, Halsey. All right, because of how the law is applied, right? There's like the hate crime laws in the United States are kind of flippant in the way they're applied, but it's almost universal. If somebody simply makes the claim that they are of Jewish background and this crime was committed upon them, there is a valid argumentation for a protected identity. I don't necessarily agree with it because, in my honest opinion, I think the idea of a hate crime is absolutely ridiculous on its face. I hate everybody equally, so to me, the
Also,
concept of
crime is always going to be motivated by hate. So it
yeah, I
doesn't
mean, there's
matter.
always a violent aspect or some sort of a malicious underpinning to any criminal act, whether it be out of necessity or just simple desire. There's always a sense of a malicious undertone there. There's a gap in morality to commit a criminal act when you know it is indeed wrong. But either way, the point being is that there is, as an American, lived here my whole life, don't believe as an Englishman. It gets down to the point of if I were to, for example, say that on a public platform that APAC should be registered under FARA, I'm universally criticized.
That's not true. It's not true. You will be criticized by certain people, but you'll be criticized by people that probably don't know why you're wrong. So, because I would argue we've kind of mildly gotten into this in the spaces that you've been in, but there's a reason why
Oh
you're
yeah, that's
wrong.
when. Wait, let me just say something.
I've
That's
never
when I
truly
yelled
had
at
to
you.
explain. I've never truly had to
Listen,
explain.
that's the funny part is when I'll say this, you will understand a bit more of what I'm saying, and then Halsey will complete it. I'm a Jew from Israel. I hate APAC.
It
I
doesn't
can't
matter whether you
stand
like
that.
them or not. It's irrelevant to the
Yeah.
point.
No,
Okay.
but I'm saying it's yeah. Go then continue. Yeah.
My point is that stressed. I would imagine that your political philosophy believes in free speech, correct?
Absolutely.
That you believe
But I
that free
thought, wait,
speech is.
before
Wait,
this
let me finish. Wait,
continues,
trust me. I'm getting to my point, and you'll understand why I'm saying this. Okay, is that most people that have complaints about APAC will list free speech as being one of their overriding philosophies, defining principles, and that they believe you should be able to say what you want, and that criticizing APAC should not be stigmatized, which I would agree with. But the thing is, APAC is made up completely 100% of Americans. It's their free speech right to advocate for whatever the hell they want. They can't register under FARA because there are no foreign participants. So if they registered under FARA, I mean, I'm sure you understand this. Registering under FARA means any money that a foreign government spends in this country, it has to be reported. Every year, APAC would file nothing. It would be pointless because they are getting zero foreign funding. No money comes from overseas. They are a collective political action committee of Americans, and they're not even majority Jews. They're majority evangelical Christians. So
I see your point, good sir. And this is where I've always had a fundamental sticking point in this argument because I'm a bit conflicted with this because at one point, because it does tie into the political dialectic, at what point does, and almost, again, tying into my hand grenade of the conversation, that politics has now become a religious dogma? Because
religion and politics have always intertwined, but the
exactly.
point being with APAC is that if the point of saying you want APAC to register with FARA is because you want it to be known that they're lobbying for what they consider to be the interest of Israel, because remember, APAC argues with the Israeli government all the time. They have very different ideas of what's right and wrong for Israel all the time. But if
I
you
know
want to
it's
argue
a walking
that
contradiction.
but what I'm saying though is that if you want to argue that they need to be publicly reported so that people understand who they are, it's in the name. AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Commission. No one thinks they're lobbying for France. Okay, like they're lobbying for Americans that are pro-Israel, which, as I said, is a free speech right fundamentally that people can
Ah,
get together, organize, and influence politics based on their political beliefs.
but let me make my case, good sir, because
Okay.
this is often the argumentation is that because the easiest way to defeat the argument I just made is to say that AIPAC does not have a majority stake in the lobbying industry in the United States. That would be Russia and China and several
Well,
other
that's
nations.
true as well.
Yeah,
But
and
one would
Qatar.
argue Russia and China both register under FARA.
Yeah, exactly. So my whole point here is that even though they may be American citizens, and I know that AIPAC does in fact disagree with the Israeli government on foreign policy and domestic policy positions on a regular basis, they are still American citizens participating in the advocacy of a foreign nation state. And regardless of if they spend $1 or 200 million or a billion, I do not care. If you are an American citizen advocating in any way, shape, or form for the continuity, the governmental body, the security, and the structure thereof of a foreign nation, you should 100% actually make it known to the rest of the American people that yes, I am an American citizen and I do advocate for the policies and the preservation thereof of a foreign nation. Now, where I would take this argumentation is I am against all lobbying in any way, shape, or form in the American body policy.
Let's do this. Let's leave that for another day because I bet you I could change your mind on that as well. But and trust me, I think lobbying is disgusting, but I understand its purpose, and I also understand that a society that doesn't have lobbying falls to despotism and basic like tyranny. Sorry, I was struggling for the word, but you just moved. But in what we were originally talking about, you just moved the goalposts. Okay, you said
In what way?
that it's because you originally said if I said AIPAC needs to register under FARA, and my point was that there even if they did, there'd be nothing to report. There would be no donations that were made by a foreign government to support AIPAC.
I'm not particularly caring about the money, sir.
Right,
I
but then
want
you
an
move the
admission of
goalpost to.
advocacy. No, it's simple. That's always been my goalpost. Is an admission of advocacy. I care not about the money, dude, because 480, a billion, 10 billion, 100 billion really doesn't make any. It's a drop in the bucket in the scheme of American politics. Doesn't really particularly matter. So my whole qualm of the issue is the admission of advocacy. I care not about the money. I don't give a shit if they
bro,
fire me.
I mean, I don't think you can get more of an admission of the advocacy. American Israel Public Advocacy Coalition, like Political Action Coalition. I'm sorry, but it's in the name. Like it's not even. They're not hiding what their goal is and what they support. And they never would. If you were to ask anybody who either supports AIPAC or is part of AIPAC, they will tell you exactly what it is they stand for. They're not going to pretend they advocate for the rights of chefs to use, I don't know, foie gras in their restaurant. That has nothing to do with what their advocacy is. You know, it's
Fair enough. And we are divulging from the space. My apologies.
But because my point being is that Qatar registers under FARA, right? Meaning when the Emir of Qatar paid Tucker Carlson to interview the Emir of Qatar, they had to report it. And there's a reason for that, because Tucker Carlson is seen by some as an independent journalist. So Qatar, under FARA, had to let everyone know that they paid for that interview. That it wasn't just done out of journalistic desire, it was done out of financial gain. I get that. But the idea that AIPAC would have to register, there are no foreign dollars. So Americans have the right to advocate for whatever they want. That's how free speech works. Again, if you want to talk about a way that can let everyone know that groups like AIPAC are advocating for the safety and security of a foreign country, that's fine. But again, we would get into a very deep issue of what your problem is with what APAC does in the first place, and I would probably be able to argue that your fear is not irrational, but it's uninformed. But
My overall point is like dual loyalty to me will forever be suspicious. But again, I don't want to distract from the space, man.
But again, if Catholic Charities, right, was advocating for the rights of Catholics in America, wouldn't that be the advocacy of a foreign country, Vatican City, for rights and privileges and protections for people that are loyal to a foreign law that is not necessarily enshrined in American law? Right? Like, they're advocating for Catholic values, not
But now,
American
hold on.
values.
There's a hole in your argument here because to compare Catholic Charities to APAC is intellectually dishonest. I'm not arguing for religious freedom.
No, you know what though? My bad. Whatever the Catholic political lobbying arm, I know there is one. I just have no idea what it's called. So I didn't mean Catholic Charities, meaning confounding a charity and a political action committee. But the Catholics do have a political action committee. I just don't remember what it's called.
Jump in for a second. Stress.
Sure.
There's no secret to what APAC does. You are welcome to join APAC in Texas and go to any meetings, go to their luncheons, go to their dinners. It won't. Yeah, I understand, but there's no secret to it. And if you want to go to Washington for their annual meeting, you can go. You can. There's no secrets. What is secret is
I think you're fundamentally misunderstanding my issue with it. It's the issue of what I just stated, a dual loyalty. Like, I would never advocate, even if I was Jewish and I'm an American citizen, I would never advocate for anything of the Israeli government. I'm an American citizen. For me to advocate
this does come back to your hand grenade. This is what I was trying to get to. Okay? Is that it used to be, when America was at its best, everybody had a dual loyalty. Okay? Everyone considered themselves German or Irish or Jewish or black, and everyone still considered themselves Americans. There was never a question of dual loyalty until that country became an enemy of America, and even then that dual loyalty sometimes played out in a big way. It used to be we didn't collectivize ourselves based on only our politics or our American identity, because our American identity means that you have no problem with a BLM rioter in St. Louis, but you do have a problem with me, a right-wing Jew from New Jersey.
Well, now, see, I don't see it as that black and white, because I do have an issue with the BLM rioter. The destruction of property is not conducive to a civil society. I absolutely have an issue, both morally and philosophically.
Would you have a problem if a Muslim came into your town and was raping people, and then people got violent over it to stop it because the government wasn't? Would you have a problem with them doing that?
No.
Exactly. It's the same thing. You just disagree with the BLM rioters. Okay? You have your own reasons that we wouldn't be that stupid that we would go burn down our own houses. But at the same time, the use of violence to accomplish a political goal is something that almost every group holds as a fundamental value if it becomes necessary.
But then we get into a political dialectic of, is it terrorism, or is it standing up for one's rights? We open an entirely different can of worms.
There's no such thing as terrorism. The word is so bad.
Oh my God. Hold on, wait, pause. Stop. My fucking heart just skipped a beat.
Mm-hmm.
I just heard a pro-Israeli say there's no such thing as terrorism. Sorry, sir.
I've always said this.
I've never heard it.
There's no such thing as terrorism.
Now you have to expound upon this, because now you've piqued my curiosity.
There's criminals, which are the BLM rioters, and there's enemies of war, which are the Palestinians. What they do are not acts of terrorism, they're acts of war. The word terrorism allows you to go into the bullshit Bush binary of saying the Muslims are actually great people. It's just the terrorists we don't like. And then
nonsense. The definition of terrorism is violence for any type of political mean, whether it be violence, intimidation, coercion, anything of that nature that has a political steering behind it can contextually, by the definition of terrorism, be considered terrorism. So, like, for example,
what I'm saying is that terrorism is a word that's used to put a collective on people so that you can't just define them as criminals. That's the problem. Is that a criminal, regardless of their motivation, just like we said for hate crimes 10 minutes ago, A motivation for a crime doesn't make it less of a crime or more of a crime. All calling it terrorism does is acknowledging that they don't speak for other people, even if they might. So what I'm saying is that you either have criminals in your own country who are doing things against your own people, or you have foreign enemies which are not terrorists. They're foreign enemies. They're what an army used to be called. Just because they don't have the means to buy jets doesn't make them less of a foreign army. So again, I don't believe that I believe terrorism is like saying it's a hate crime. It's adding a complexity to it that doesn't need to exist, and that only exists in order to lessen the result of the people who are terrorized, the reaction of the people who are terrorized.
You know, that's a wonderful way to put it, and we do have other hands. You know, again, Halsey, this is why I respect you, sir. You are very measured.
It's what I think about this stuff because I think it's important. You know, like, again, how many times
I
have you
wasn't
even used
sure how you were going to steer that one back, because to say that, yeah, I don't believe in terrorism kind of is antithetical to most of your political stance.
But I'm saying, when you hear people say the enemy is Hamas, not the Palestinian people, but then in the same vein, they say Hamas took place in September 11th, but the majority of people who raided the country and killed Jews were civilians. Okay, so then how is Hamas the
October
problem if the
7th,
civilians killed people? Wouldn't you just say that the enemy killed people, and the goal of a war is to defeat the enemy? It's to make the enemy surrender. That is the goal of a war. The goal of fighting terrorism is to find people that have bad political philosophies that are willing to use violence and separate them from the general people who support them, who pay for them, who give them all kinds of spiritual sanction, religious leaders. All those people get pushed to the side because you're just looking for the guy with the gun who committed an act, as opposed to a philosophy which is a philosophy of war. If you fight a war like it's supposed to be fought, you win the war. If you fight a war on terrorism, you get 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan that accomplish nothing, because it's the terrorists you're after, not the enemy.
Touche, good sir, touche. Yeah, there are other hands. Wonderful.
Yeah. I will be short because I really do want to hear what Don't's going to say here too. But
Me too.
I want to recognize and understand that a lot of what draws people into these weird streams that go like into cult like thinking and groupthink that really leads to horrible things is the basis that they connect with community, that they connect with other people, and
The
through
sense
that
of belonging.
relationship.
Yes, the sense of
Yeah, the
belonging.
sense of belonging is very strong, and it's intrinsic to all people, and for good reason. And yet, also another thing that like I feel like is often misunderstood, and many times causes even more misunderstanding and hatred, is not knowing that there are empires on the earth right now that are empires and are not necessarily treated as nation states or nations, but they operate with the same level or greater than nations do. And America has made itself an empire on the earth, whether we like to admit that or not. Islam in many aspects also, but they're very divided amongst themselves. And Catholicism and the Roman papacy, and the very similitude of there being a king with the smallest land mass that they govern over, but also have their influence upon so many people. And so I could almost also say that people now are getting into the belief and idea that supposedly the Jewish people, or fake Jews as it were, are somehow this power group that is hidden and secretive or something. But even so, like, if there is a cabal, I don't think it's mainly just Jews. I think it would be all people groups are kind of interconnected and involved in this thing. It's more or less like good versus evil. But if I allow that, I don't know, I'm not the sole proprietor of belief or understanding of how the world works. It's not like I have it all figured out. But like, if we
It's because of the
recognize these
word that you
things,
left out. It's because of the word you left
what's
out.
that?
Pride.
Well, yeah, I'm
Okay,
sorry. Can you repeat that?
We have a historian that comes here all the time named Alex, right? And if you, he's probably one of the best experts about World War II that I know. And if you ask him, why did World War II start? Why did Germany start World War? What led to the rise of Hitler? Being German was considered a dirty word. There was no pride. The soldiers came back from war to a country that was destroyed, and the women were working, so they didn't have like the kingship over their house anymore. Their country was broke because they were paying back reparations to all the foreign worlds. There was no pride in being German. So what it led to was a pride in being Aryan. When you say empires, we have the same problem. There's no pride in being American. There's only apologetics these days. Is that we don't talk about how great it is to America. We apologize for how shitty America's been and say that's not me. Right? And when you take away people's pride,
I'm
that's
very
what
proud
leads
to be
to
American.
me too. But what I'm saying is when you take away
Yeah,
people's
it shouldn't
pride,
be the self hatred of America. It shouldn't be, but there's a lot of that. Yeah.
but when you take away people's pride, you watch how fast they collectivize under some of the worst people that you'll ever meet because people will I tell this story all the time. It's the most ridiculous story. I did an internship in DC when I was in college, right? And I had this thing. I would go to all of like the parties and receptions and all of that because I like talking to interesting people. And if I found myself talking to someone that like either was famous or interesting, I would ask them to please tell me a story that people don't regularly hear because I'm just interested to hear it. And God knows why, I found myself talking to Geraldine Ferraro. She was the vice presidential candidate that ran against Reagan. Okay, the with Mondale. And I said to her, please tell me this story. And she said it was the craziest thing. After we got thumped and we lost 49 states, we went to a union rally in one of the Midwest states. I forgot what it was. And we thanked them for their help and whatever. And then she said they got in with the leadership of the union. And they said, you know, we looked at the numbers. Your union voted like 90% for Reagan. We're your dream come true. We support unions. We support everything you guys stand for. We were going to give you everything you wanted, and you voted for Reagan. Why? And the guys, all of them looked around and said, because he makes us proud. And she said it fundamentally altered her entire way of looking at politics, is that people will avoid everything that's good for them or that's in their interest if the other side makes them proud. And it's a big deal. And it's not something I've ever forgotten. Although I still have no reason to explain why I was at a reception finding myself talking to Geraldine Ferraro. Dumbbell, go for it, man.
I'm sorry, I hate this. Can we hear from Don't Believe? I usually
I
fucking yell.
I just said, I thought Don't Bell. I thought it was Dumbbell. I'm sorry. Go for it, man. You're up.
Halsey, by the way,
Yes.
it's a wonderful, it's amazing what you just said. It's really nice.
Thank you. But Don't Bell, go for it, man.
Don't believe.
Yeah, I just had a
Don't believe.
couple
I'm
of
sorry, I
questions,
can't see
also.
the names. I can only see like a little piece of it.
Yeah, can you hear me fine?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just had a couple of questions. You said earlier that Zionism is the same as nationalism in the United States of America, so I'd be interested to hear how you would defend that position. And secondly, how you, if there was a strong nationalist government in the United States and in Europe, how would the state of Israel and Zionism as a whole fare with a nationalist sentiment in the West to combat?
Ooh, my man. You asked me one of those questions that's a little hard for me because I have to put a caveat in what I'm going to say. For all intents and purposes, Zionists and nationalists should be best friends. But because nationalism tends to also group right-wing people that have certain types of biases, there tends to be an inherent distrust between the two. So on paper, they should get along great. In reality, they tend to just want to stay away from each other or attack each other. So it's one of those weird things. That's why I said that nationalist movements should learn from Zionism. I didn't say they should be incorporated into it or that they should be like necessarily allies with it. It's that what they want is the same thing for their people that I want for mine. That's what I said.
Yeah, so I would say that would put them in direct competition ultimately, wouldn't it? But in terms of World War One, I think part of the reason that the Germans turned on the Jewish people as a whole,
World War II, you mean?
It's well post World War One. I think the Germans were ultimately winning World War One until the Americans joined and the English were given funding by several international banks, including German ones,
Right.
So do you agree? Do you agree that the banking class ultimately betrayed Germany and led a path really to the scapegoating of the Jews in Germany?
I
Halsey,
think
can I?
majority, real quick, Warhound, right after I comment. I think majoritively, things aren't done for nefarious purposes. I think that people, and this goes back to the dialectic we were talking about, I think that people generally think what they're doing is the right thing, even if what they're doing is the hideously wrong thing. So, do I think the banker class has a lot to answer for? Sure, but I also think the banker class thinks that what they're doing is a good thing. So I don't think I think the German anger towards the banker class was probably one of the main reasons that they got crushed. And I think that the banker class saw in Germany an enemy, and it was not a good thing. But at the same time, I think that if you'll notice, the countries that work with their banker class or even foreign banker classes in order to promote their own interests, I think you find that they usually not only are very successful, but that they don't have contradictory principles. They're not fighting for different things. They're fighting for the same thing. They just don't antagonize. Like, it's like you don't bite the hand that feeds you. You know, like if you need money to win a war, you don't go after the people that have the money. You know, because not only are they going to try to make sure you don't get any of it, but they're going to use it against you. Whereas if you ally with them, it doesn't matter whether, even if they are nefarious people, you still survive what could easily be the end of your society if you don't. You know, like, again, so it's a tricky question because I don't have any love for bankers myself. But at the same time, I understand that every war that's been won has basically been won because, at least modernly, because the money was there to make sure they could win. So, and the ones that went on the class warfare against the people that had the money, mostly they lost. So, it just is
I
what
would
it
like
is.
to add.
Please
I
go
would
ahead,
like to
Warhound.
add on to that real quick. So one of the other things that you have to understand is that so there's a historical precedent for Germany. You know, if you go back to the Holy Roman Empire days when they first started establishing all the banks that existed up until the end of World War II or end of World War One, because a lot of those banks ended up shuttering afterwards. Um, Germany, the reason why it was able to industrialize and why it was such a successful nation overall was because they actually had a proper commercial banking side. This is why the United States was as successful as it was, because of our commercial banking. And nowhere in the world has that. Like, let's be completely frank. Banking as a whole across the world was never really commercialized until the Germans and the Americans did it. And the Germans brought the concept of commercial banking to the United States. That's where a lot of the big banks get their starts, is from German immigrants. So you have that, and then you carry forth with the fact that World War One, what really killed the Germans, which really put the nail in the coffin for the war effort, was the fact that they helped Lenin. A lot of people don't know this. Lenin couldn't get into Russia. Trotsky had managed to get into Russia with British assistance earlier, but Lenin couldn't get into Russia because he was a pariah to the Tsarist government and to the majority of the country. Like, everybody thought he was a fucking crazy person, which, you know, comparing him to Trotsky was definitely crazier. But the fact of the matter is that the Germans then helped get Lenin into Russia, and then that bit them in the ass hardcore, because then, you know, yeah, they were able to in the Eastern Front, but then all of a sudden the British and the French seized upon that, like, oh my God, look at this, look at what's going on over in Russia, you know, so on and so forth, yada yada yada. The Germans were blamed for the collapse of the Tsar, and then eventually the murder of the Tsar, which then kicked off the civil war in Russia. The Germans were blamed for it, and so they were beaten upside the head with that for years. And then another follow-on effect was the 1919, the overthrow of the Kaiser, which then the overthrow of the Kaiser happens. That unshields, because the Kaiser shielded the banking class hardcore from a lot of the anarchist movements that were propping up within Germany at the time. Once the Kaiser was out of the way and the Weimar Republic comes into being, the banking class was basically, they were persona non grata. And once that happened, commercial banking kind of went tits up across the board. And then the Brits and the French end up sucking up as much of that as possible through the reparations. The
But you're
Brits.
kind of discounting the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute and the SDP, though. I mean, if you really want to delve into that,
No,
with
but
the whole
I'm gonna add to what Warhound's saying, because I think I get what he's saying, because me and him talk all the time, but he's missing one of the points that he's trying to make that would bring this home to you guys. Is that
Okay, go ahead.
and I'm going to use the American example just because it's easier. Okay, is that most people, and when I say most, I mean probably like 70-80% of the people in America, if you ask them if they were a fan of the Federal Reserve, they would tell you either no or have no opinion. And the vast majority of them would be no. Okay? Now, if you ask them why they don't like the Federal Reserve, they'll have no idea. Right? They'll just tell you that they think it's evil, or they're the reason why we're in so much debt, or whatever. But what the part they don't realize is that without the Federal Reserve, we would all still be farmers, which some of us don't think that's a big problem. But a lot of American prosperity has been because of the Federal Reserve. So as much as I have an issue with modern monetary theory, because I think it's too much of a catch-all like communism, where it's just, oh, everything's going to work out, don't worry. But at the same time, again, when you harness the people that have the money, and you're able to work with the people that have the money, they produce for society what's good for them, which is making more money, because what's the purpose of capital? Using it to make more money. So, like, people hate banks and they hate bankers, but no one complains when you go to the bank to buy a house and they lend you $300,000 to buy a house. Like, everybody hates bankers, but when you need a car and don't have 40 grand to go buy a car, a banker steps in and gives you the money. Now, we could argue about interest rates, but it's irrelevant, because whether they charge you 1% or 20%, you still don't have a house or a car without them. So a lot of times,
I mean, Halsey, that's a bit of a fallacious argument, because the issue is pricing. The reason people need to borrow money in order to purchase things is because pricing has become so ridiculous in the modern age. And
Well,
I think also
blame
in
the case of the U.S. real quick.
One second. Before the Fed was established in 1919, America had already industrialized. So how can you claim that we'd still be farmers?
I understand that, but there was a limit to growth, which is why we got the Great Depression.
I would say the Great Depression is largely in part to the early expression of the Federal Reserve's policies in the modern monetary system. I mean, the true implementation of Keynesian economics in the United States came to be under the Federal Reserve System after the passing of the Federal Reserve Act.
I will put this out there, because that is fundamentally false. Because that doesn't come into play until the 50s. See, the Federal Reserve. Okay, a little history here. J.P. Morgan, the man himself, was one of the biggest opponents of the Federal Reserve.
A lot of bankers were.
And when he saw that the Federal Reserve was going to happen, that they were going to shoehorn it, that they were going to force it upon us, what he did is he lobbied hardcore to create what he referred to as the lender of last resorts, which was the Federal Reserve is meant to be the lender of last resort, period, in a story. It's not meant to give money to individual people. It's not meant to give money to, it's meant to be a regulation device. It's meant to be a governor. Mm-hmm. The commercial banks still operate. They still do their thing. They still, they're giving out the individual loans, so on and so forth. The Federal Reserve doesn't get into that. That's why the Federal Reserve doesn't do that right now, because JP Morgan lobbied that so hard. You don't really see Keynesian economics come into play until the 50s, when as the Cold War starts to get underway in 53 after the death of Stalin, you end up having the Europeans, and this is where the infiltration comes into play, because a lot of people blame the Jews for infiltrating.
I think you
the US government
misunderstand
and
me,
whatnot.
sir. I think you misunderstand me. My premise is you would not have the ability to enact Keynesian economics without the implementation of the Federal Reserve through the Federal Reserve Act.
And I'm just going to put this out here. If it wasn't for the UK, we wouldn't have the Federal Reserve.
That's
Because what
actually
is the
true.
Federal
Exactly
Reserve?
why I'm opposed to it. Like it's still in all shape and form. It is a foreign
Stress. Do you know
body.
why you're opposed to it? And I don't know how to word this nicely, so I'm just gonna like
Say it like a dickhead. I can take it.
You're at the ass end of it. Remember, Keynesian theory is that when times are bad, spend; when times are good, save. What they've done, right, pretty much forever, but more so after modern monetary theory became a thing, they spent under both terms. They never actually tightened their belts when it became times of plenty. So what you're seeing is the result
But that's
of a
simply
system
because
that.
we let the leashes. No, hold on. You misunderstand my position. The fact that we gave the monetary creation power to a private institution instead of Congress is my main fucking problem.
Oh
The
my
reason
God!
why
Could
we are
you
in the
imagine
position
how
we're
bad
in.
it would have been if we gave that power to Congress? Holy
It was
shit!
initially posted in our Constitution that it should be under Congress.
I
Oh wait,
agree with
stress. I
you,
want to
but
point out. I just
holy
want to point
shit!
out a good tool misused does not mean that the tool is not good or necessary.
That's
It
all
means
I'm
the tool
stating.
was
I'm
I
against it
misused.
agree.
because it is
And Keynesian
abused.
economics is the ultimate misuse of the tool.
Exactly what my point is exactly the point I'm trying to make. Just poorly wording it. That's the whole
Okay,
thing. The
but
Federal
then you're
Reserve is
not
a wild
actually.
Well,
But
beast.
and here's the thing, and I'm gonna again, I want to point this out. The European central banking model that the Federal Reserve was supposed to be. If you actually look up at the original, like get into the original documentation, because some of the original documentation from Jekyll Island does survive to this day, and there are examples of it available out there. When you look into the original documentation that was supposed to be the framework for the Federal Reserve, it was supposed to be a Bank of England style bank. It was supposed to be a central bank that did everything, got rid of commercial banking, so on and so forth. Now, why would they want to do this? Well, the point is that the Europeans, because they had central banking for so long, they had stunted their growth. Again, the Germans, the Holy Roman Empire gave the Germans the breathing room to have a commercial banking sector, whereas every other nation, France, England, et cetera, they all had central banks that were handling state resources and this and that and so on and so forth. Well, it didn't leave room for a commercial banking sector. And even to this day, they don't really have a commercial banking sector whatsoever. And what you end up having is that the US is getting ahead and ahead and ahead and ahead. Those central banks and those governments need to stifle that, because at this point in time, who can catch up to in Europe, specifically in Europe, who can catch up to the United States?
No, and
Name one
Warhound,
country.
going back to your original point about Germany, and adding on to what Stress said, Congress enacting monetary policy like the Federal Reserve without a Federal Reserve, what you would have is the unlimited creation of currency without any moderating effect of raising interest rates. So what would happen is that because Congress would never vote to raise interest rates, that they would not be in Congress anymore if they did.
It became
What you
Keynesian economics.
Yeah, like what you would see is they would just print all the money that they ever could, and then never do anything about it, which would lead to such rapid inflation that millions of people would die.
Which is why, and I'll point this out to Gilliman, is that's why the Treasury fought Congress on so many different occasions back in the day. This is why when they passed the Federal Reserve Act, they also passed the popular election of senators, because the Senate is what matters in the case of the Treasury. So if all of a sudden you force the inability of people to get rid of their bad senators because, hey, Mr. Governor man, recall this asshole. We don't want him. Okay, that's what we had prior to 1916 or whatever the hell when it passed. I'll be right back.
We'll take it a step further. And you just saw, I have a great example from very, very recently. Donald Trump has been highly critical of Jerome Powell and telling him he needs to lower interest rates, right? And the reason he wants to lower interest rates is he wants people buying more homes. He wants all of that because it stirs economic activity. The reason why people who understand economics like lose their minds, including myself, is that Donald Trump, if we lowered interest rates to zero right now, we would set the housing market on fire. Like, if you think houses and rents are expensive now, lower interest rates back to zero, and then within a year, watch inflation go higher than it ever was under Biden. And that's because it sounds good.
You'd also further weaken the dollar. The dollar is really not
sure.
performing well against the other currencies.
Oh no!
Just quickly,
I'm going to point this out.
The reason.
BlackRock.
One second, Wow.
Wait, Warren.
The reason for the Great Depression was ultimately the stock market crashed, and the reason the stock market crashed is there was unfettered expansion of credit to companies that were buying stocks. So, the Federal Reserve was 1919, and the run on the stock market was 1929. So that was the first bust cycle. So we've been in perpetual boom and bust cycles ever since the Fed was created. So I would argue that the Great Depression was at least partially down to the credit expansion by the Federal Reserve.
It was the second bust cycle. The first one was under Calvin Coolidge, and he didn't intervene. Not a Democrat, so he let it go, and it wasn't nearly as bad.
Well, I'm also going to point this out, and this is the problem I have with that narrative, is you actually look at it, oh, wait, what really caused the problem? The Fed starts doing their thing, 1924 rolls around. What does Winston Churchill do as the financial minister? Oh, he repegs the pound to gold at the pre-World War I prices, and that causes the German economy to go tits up completely, which then causes the French economy to go tits up, which then causes the British economy to go tits up, and then the cascade effect goes over to the U.S. because who lent all the money to these nations in order to do Reconstruction?
So, well, I mean, to be fair in that regard, though,
the credit expansion was part of the problem, but it wasn't the main problem.
But no, we could take it to a modern day cycle. Fuck the past. Past is the worst. Take it to a modern day cycle. Look at the 2008 financial crash in the United States. Same thing, smaller scale, to where we had this unfettered credit access among these large commercial banks that were inevitably bailed out by the Fed. So it's again, we get to this political dialectic that Hegelian described in the center of the point of this conversation, a problem, reaction, solution, the snake eating its own fucking tail. We create a problem to solve a problem that we created about a problem, then create another problem to solve a problem.
I can't believe you're going to make me do this. I can't believe you're going to make me do this. But I have to actually, I don't think he did it. I think he just let it go. But now you're going to make me defend Obama, which I fucking hate you for, Stress. Like, seriously, I will curse you for this.
Oh, I'm doing a fucking dance, Halsey. I'm doing a dance. Let me hear it.
So here's the issue. The banks weren't really bailed out. What the Fed did was ingenious. Through TARP, they bought the troubled assets that were on the bank's balance sheet and held them. So because the government didn't have the need to make themselves liquid, whereas the banks did. And so by instituting TARP, what happened in 2008 stopped a worldwide global meltdown. And
it should have been allowed to happen. Hold on, brother. Hold on. Pause. It should have been allowed to fucking happen. Because essentially what you were sitting here defending is people paying for their own fuck-ups and lining their own pockets for failing fucking upwards. Literally. That's all they did. They took all that bailout money and they lined their own pockets and fucking failed upwards. Because where does Jerome Powell, our current Fed chair, come from? None other than the fucking 2008 financial crisis. I mean, he's a Nepo baby made manifest.
Oh, listen, again, this will be something that if we want to get into this argument, we can get into. Jerome Powell has done more for this country than you can possibly fathom. It's just he doesn't get any credit for it. But what I'm saying, you could dislike him all you want. He's positioned us to be in a position to actually reindustrialize at the fall of Europe. Like, he's literally protected us against Europe better than anyone in our political class at all. Like, the contagion that's hit Europe with this constant debt cycle that they can't pay back is actually threatened to take us down with it. And that's why Jerome Powell and Trump have such arguments, by the way, is because Jerome Powell does his thing and he doesn't care what Trump says, because Trump doesn't have an economic idea of what's going on. He just says, this sounds good, and says, do this, do that, and Jerome Powell says no. That's why Trump doesn't like him.
Halsey, I'll point out, notice how Trump will raise holy hell towards Jerome Powell. The next Tuesday, Jerome Powell and Scott Bessent will meet up for lunch, and then Wednesday, Trump shuts up.
Yeah.
And that's the point. And listen, I understand people have angst towards Wall Street and whatnot. Let's be completely honest. Two things happened with 2008. One, Lehman Brothers was the ones at fault. They're the ones that repackaged everything and sold it off to everybody else because they were going to go down.
Bear Stearns, J.P. Morgan, all of them.
No.
Yeah, let's not. We don't even need to talk about how retarded they were for what they did.
Fine. The point is that they are the ones that started it. They're the ones that should have the blame laid at their feet. They're the ones that should have been in jail.
No. I want to address what's. Oh, okay. Go ahead. Finish.
The other thing is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The U.S. government putting those two companies into receivership. If you want to know why the fuck home prices are so fucking high, if you want to know why you're incapable of getting loans, even though you're perfectly capable of being able to pay that shit back, the reason why is because you have not been able to get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage for the past 17 fucking years.
That is so not true. That is like literally the opposite of true.
I'm on a 30-year fixed rate right now. What the fuck are you talking about?
No, the point. Okay, let me explain. Because what you have is that by having those two in receivership, they are taking the profits. They're not able. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are not reinvesting those profits. The U.S. government is taking them and they're using them to pay for Obamacare.
Yeah, it's always been a slush fund. That's the whole reason why you lay it at other people's feet. I lay the feet for the 2008 crisis at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They've always been.
I really don't want to get into the weeds, but just I mean, take it.
Wait, Halsey, sure. One second. I'm just seeing reports. I don't know if it's true that the U.S. just invaded Venezuela and Trump's about to go on and talk about it in a few minutes.
Well,
Let's fucking go, baby.
I have to close.
I don't know if it's true. Again,
I have to close.
Please look.
Anyway,
I don't know if it's true.
I just want to address two things. Number one, getting a 30-year fixed mortgage is super easy. Secondly, the reason that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are doing what they're doing is they're doing exactly what banks do. Instead of investing in commercial dealings, they're investing in government policy. If they didn't do that, just so you know, because by the way, every bank that borrowed money from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they paid it back. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac still had all of these fucking houses that they had to sell, and they made a fortune doing it. If they didn't do that, the Federal Reserve would have had to print all of the money that the government spent on Obamacare and all of that shit. Because if you think they wouldn't have done it without the money from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, you're wrong. And we would have seen the Biden level inflation before COVID. Which, could you imagine what it would have been after COVID? Holy shit. Secondly, the whole concept of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the Troubled Asset Relief Program and Jerome Powell and how they're all tied together, right, is that what Stress said is fundamentally true, okay? Sometimes you have to let people feel the consequences of their actions. And a lot of times people will. You don't study, you get an F on the test, you don't pass the class, right? Sorry, but you had a lesson to learn. I wasn't going to kick your ass to study every 5 minutes, so you had to learn that you value studying without me putting my foot up your ass. At the time of the 2008 financial crisis, that wasn't that. That was a kid walking off of a balcony And you can say to yourself, well, he'll fall and die, and then he'll learn the lesson of he shouldn't walk off of balconies. No, you grab the kid, even if he's not going to learn anything from it. Or even if it's going to have a negative result in that he believes that no matter how stupid he is, you're going to come to his rescue. There's a point where the tough love parent always is going to do something a little unwarranted in order to save someone from destruction, and we were there in
And this is a greater example of why societies fail, but we'll dive into that. Brian has had his hand.
Well, no, because even as much as The Big Short was a simplification, there's a very important line in that movie, which is that for every point of unemployment, you lose thousands of people. They just die because
2.3 million people die. Yeah, 2.3 million.
2.3 million. Okay. So listen, when Halsey's talking about going off the cliff, he's talking about multiple points. He's talking about 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 points, right? That's millions of people dying. And you saw how crazy people went with COVID with, 500,000 people died, 1 million people died. Okay. Are you okay with actually 2.3, 4, 5, 6, 8 million people dying?
No, but you know what he's not. But you know what he wouldn't be okay with, which is what would have happened if it didn't work out the way that it was. When the entire financial system crashed, all of those poor people that lost everything and that would have nuked the entire financial system, those people would have gone on welfare. And it would have bankrupted us 10,000 times worse than bailing out the banks. Keeping the system in place while it had its negatives, right? It was the best shit pie in the shit toilet. In that,
you're saying Congress would have legislated more spending to cover 100%. To prevent those deaths,
and there would have been no money to do it. They would have had to straight up print it.
So they would have used an unsophisticated tool that would have continued on in perpetuity and expanded, as opposed to what they did, which was a discrete intervention, which then we can talk about what, like the companies being receivership and all of the downstream effects from that. Those are small and getting smaller, as opposed to an entirely new social welfare program that expands.
I think thou doth assume too much. I do believe that the market that the U.S. economy was founded on would have found a way to self-regulate. I do not believe that these large, hyper, mega corporations that have essentially become monopolistic by our own pacification and self-acceptance are in any way as necessary to the fundamental framework of our society or the survival thereof as the fucking... I mean, as a lobbyist.
Do you understand what just-in-time... I think it's called just-in-time. Do you understand that New York City... Well, I'm just using that as an example. This is not a liberal or conservative thing. New York City has 3 days worth.
Brian left because we forgot him with his hand, by the way.
Okay, but what I'm saying though is that New York City has 3 days worth of chlorine to make its water drinkable. It has, I think, 4 days of medicine.
I'm aware. We're
credit.
Our society's
there was no more credit. If we just let the financial system melt down, the chaos that would have erupted from that would have cost trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars, to the point where I don't even think it could be measured what the debt would be before COVID. If they didn't do something to intervene, and their intervention was exceptionally mild for what would have happened if they didn't do it. Now, was it done completely right? No. And they knew they were going to fuck up by giving the bank certain levels of bailouts, because the banks had contracts, and you can't void a contract. If someone has a bonus coming to them...
Can I make a concession to you, sir? I will concede to you that their course of action may have been the most logical at the time. Where me, the average American who's never seen $1 million in my fucking life, much less the hundreds of billions that they got in bailouts, where my point of contention would be is they held absolutely nobody responsible for it.
I agree with you. That I agree with you on. I agree with you 100%. Criminally, there should have been a lot of people that were held responsible, and they just didn't.
Oh, Lehman Brothers should have been a ghost town with arrests. Like, it should have been absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I don't think you'll find anyone who disagrees with you on that. The biggest issue of the bailout was that they didn't hold people criminally responsible.
That's where my opinion basis is formed of, man, because I come from a dirt poor family. Like, I didn't have fucking running water.
Dude, my father is a truck driver. My mother is a public school teacher. How much money do you think I had growing up?
Probably more than me. I didn't have running water until I was 13, man. So when I watched all this happen,
you had it worse than me. I'll concede.
I just moved to a small town, little town called Reedsburg. It's in central Wisconsin. It's about 12,000 people today. That was the first city I have ever lived in. And anybody in here, you can Google it and look at what I'm calling a city. So, like, not to me, when that all happened, I was in middle school, man. Like, no, sorry, I had just graduated high school, like when the whole financial crisis happened. So when I was in middle school, in my young formative years, I watched this like boom bust cycle take place, and then middle America, the Midwest, where I grew up in, Wisconsin, died as a result of it.
You see, that's where what you were saying, and I really got to go. But what you were saying before was completely accurate, based on the idea that because we didn't hold the bankers responsible, meaning throwing people in jail for cheating the system and causing the crisis, they just let them know they could do it again. But the government's monetary policy towards the bank and the economy was really well done, like really well done. It's the fact they didn't couple it with criminal prosecution. That's where you tell the kid, you don't study, you don't pass the test.
But we're on the same verge of the same collapse now with the AI bubble. I mean, like Tesla's P/E ratio alone is the same ratio that the fucking banks were running at.
Let's get into that another time. I kind of agree with you, but I kind of don't. I don't think the AI bubble is big enough yet that it can't self-correct, and I think it's probably going to. I think it'll probably lead to some economic downturn. Saeed, I'll let you go because I know you've been waiting a while, but I really got to run in like the next 5 minutes.
Can I just change the gaze? I've got a question that you guys were talking about earlier. Is Israel working closely with, or I think the question was more like Zionists working closely with the nationalists in Europe and America. What is the outlook with the Chinese Communist Party? How are you guys going to work with the global South? You know,
I don't think
China.
I don't think China comes into that question at all. I think that China has nothing to do with well, at least with Israel. I don't find China to be the enemy that everyone says they are. I think they do fucked up shit that all countries do, but I don't think that they're inherently like this evil empire like the Soviet Union. I wish they were, because it would make all of our distractions that we put on China to be a lot more based and, have a good result. But the Chinese, if they're anything, they're not stupid. They're not going to pick a fight with a country that has the ability to destroy them 50 times over without even using nukes. Okay? Not to mention, their economy is completely tied to ours. Like, we could talk about how, oh, yeah, well, we could do this or they could do this. They could cut off our Benadryl or whatever. China cuts off, if China and America break ties at the moment or even slow down ties, China collapses. Their entire economy is pegged to ours. Their entire currency is pegged to ours. Like, and everyone, oh my God, they're going to invade Taiwan. Why would they? Why would they feed their troops into a meat grinder that they're going to get for free anyway? All they have to do is pay off some politicians there to sell them the chips they want. That's the only thing they care about with Taiwan, is they produce chips that we won't let them sell. And you could tell that's going to be going the way of the dodo very soon, because that's why we're building all our own chip production here. We know Taiwan's eventually going to give them to them. It's just we love to create a good enemy, and we love to create a good bullshit thing to look at. Oh my God, they're going to invade Taiwan, and then we're going to go to war with China. The U.S. isn't going to war with China. Not over Taiwan. Not over anything like that. They'll go to war with something about America. They're not going to war with China over Taiwan. Fucking China. China says Taiwan is part of us, and America says, yeah, we're not going to. They make the Taiwanese come in through the side door when they visit the White House. Like, China has always been a big distraction. Yes, they do plenty of fucked up shit, but remember this. America has 12 carriers at sea. At any given time, that's over 1,000 planes at sea that could strike anywhere in the world. China has 2 aircraft carriers. One of them's never launched a plane. The other one, they put it in the water and it sank. Okay? There is not a competition with us in China. If there's anything, China just doesn't care that we demonize them whenever we want to. But I'm not saying they're good guys. Don't get me wrong. Like anybody who
is
eats a
India
fried
going
dog is a
AWOL?
fucking gross pig to me.
Sorry for interrupting. Do you think India is going AWOL, and do you think they're going to change their policies and move closer to China?
India is a duplicitous snake on a geopolitical scale. They will kneel at the feet of whoever will give them the best deal. They are never to be trusted.
While I do agree with you, because India is hideously corrupt, that's an exceptionally long conversation. And trust me, I have no love for India. So it's not like I'm coming from I'm not going to defend India. I'm just saying it's a long conversation, and I really have to go. Okay, I got to go pick up my kids. So, guys, I'll be back tomorrow morning, and we can talk this more. In fact, I won't be back till late tonight, so I won't be able to open tonight. But we can talk tomorrow morning in my normal space. Sunday, my normal space. Thanks for following, guys. Thanks for participating. Stress, fucking awesome, man. I hope these conversations continue. Okay, and thanks to Noam for bringing up the topic in the first place. Follow the host, follow the speakers, and pay attention when the spaces start. We've got a lot of good ones coming up. Talk to everybody soon.
Thank you, Alsay. Thank you.
My fellow Americans, tonight I am speaking to you because there is a growing humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border.
In all honesty, a border wall or steel slats won't work. But great bodies of water will separate us from the horrible Mexican rapists. Introducing the 2019 Trump Great Border Mode. Stocked with the most aggressive penis fish. Incredible man-eating alligators. And unbelievable genetically modified moose-cock rape dolphins. As well as flying, migrant-eating sharkfish. So incredible.
I swore to protect our country. And that is what I will always do. So help me God. Thank you and good night.